Everyone. It's 6 o'clock. We'll call the meeting to order. We have some very special guests with us today, and I'll explain why in a moment. But the Girl Scouts are here, and I'll ask you, if you don't mind, if I can put you on the spot and ask you to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we will begin, as we always do, with public audience. Any member of the public can speak for up to 5 minutes, and anyone who needs additional time can always reach out to me. Come.
Joan Coe, 26 Whitcomb Drive. According to the Simsbury Charter, the Board of Selectmen provides their performance evaluation of the town manager to the town. After decades of discussing the need for professional management, the Charter Revision Commission voted for a professional town manager to replace an elected first selectman to manage the town. Town manager Maria Capriola has exceeded the goals and expectations of the Board of Selectmen. Since the transition from an elected official to a professional manager, many of the stipulations in the town charter require many layers of oversight that are no longer needed. The next Charter Revision Commission should eliminate many of the redundancies in management to increase efficiencies. Presently, the town has professional management in the finance department, flagging many of the deficiencies in the management of the town finances. Many monetary policy decisions have to be initiated to rectify shortfalls in the management of the public funds. The Health Insurance Fund and the Internal Service Fund has shortfalls that require immediate attention and will be challenging. The Simsbury Farms Revenue Fund has thousands of dollars in shortfalls year after year, subsidized by the Simsbury taxpayers. Since many of the programs provided are seasonal, there should be an elimination of full-time staff by hiring part-time managers for recreational activities. There should be a study on the need for a public-private partnership for efficiencies at the golf course. The budget should reflect the reductions in cost sharing from the state that might be reduced or eliminated that would decrease the town's revenue. The cash for capital policy should include paying off the present debt and delaying projects that have been approved before the groundbreaking begins. The budget should reflect the increase in residential development that appears to surpass the demand and place increased pressure on developers to lease their property, leading to lower assessments, lower revenues for the town in the future. Deepwater Wind has sold a solar farm to Northlight Energy. Northlight Energy has to produce a DEP stormwater action plan and return to the Siting Council to finalize outstanding stipulations. What is the timeline on this project and town costs associated with the project? The town purchased the Hudson property, and here's a map of the property. The town purchased the Hudson property, 1 Old Bridge Road, near the Flower Bridge. There have been ongoing discussions for the use of the property as a significant driver for a destination area. The town also owns the land where the sewer department, 36 Drake Hill Road, has its facilities in close proximity to the crew boat launch and boathouse. As the town goes forward with the discussions on the use of the property, they should not be myopic by only studying the use of the assets of the Hudson property. The town should take a holistic approach to incorporating all the town land in close proximity to the Farmington Valley by incorporating the land where the crew team has a boat launch and the boathouse for boat storage as a tourist attraction with easy access to the Farmington River for recreational activities. Google Earth map, here it is again, shows the Flower Bridge and Drake Hill Road all interconnecting, making this valuable asset a driver for economic development and a tourist designation, all town-owned property. After a recent incident that occurred at a student's home, placed the Board of Education in an indefensible position of trying to defend actions of some students who were not mindful of the consequences of their actions. A third-grade teacher in the Midwest decided to teach her third-grade class a lesson in discrimination in conjunction with Martin Luther King Day. She divided her class into two groups by the color of their eyes. One group was given privileges while the other group was discriminated against. This experiment highlighted how easy it is to program people to discriminate against one another by the color of their eyes. The Frontline documentary on YouTube, A Class Divided, has been seen by many people around the world. I would suggest that everyone view this documentary for insight on how discrimination starts and consequences of people's actions. It appears the students at Simsbury High School are caught by using vaping products in school. According to an article in the Hartford Courant, CDC, Center for Disease Control, vaping causing drastic increase in teen tobacco use. South Windsor Mayor, a physician specializing in lung disease and critical care, was quoted as saying, and I quote, "I'm seeing people die every few days. When someone in their 30s dies of lung cancer, it impacts you. When someone in their 40s dies with lung cancer, it impacts you. What can we do as a society? What can we do as a community?" End quote. Young people always think it can't happen to them, but it can. Why take a chance? And all of my comments will be posted on Simsbury Patch, Twitter at Joan Co., and Newsfeed on Facebook with the picture so you can see the area of the Hudson property. And there.
Great, thank you very much, Joan. Would anyone else like to speak in public audience? Yes.
Hi, I'm Maria Ecke, and I've lived in Simsbury for 40 years. And we all know how special our town is, with its beautiful mountains, rivers, waterfalls, and wildlife. It's truly a star among the other towns in Connecticut. On this we can all agree. Now I'd like to discuss some issues about our town that we, the citizens, will likely agree upon. Here's where the problem lies. When the people in power are also the people who make the decision to give themselves a pay raise, there becomes a colossal conflict of interest. We, the citizens, who sit idly by as our leaders position themselves into their power seats, must never forget that it is we, the citizens, that are the only structure in place we have to monitor and keep the mighty power of their pens in control. The only way we have to do this is to remember who passed the budget and who they were, and remember their names. So when it's next time to go to the voting booths, we, the citizens, can finally yield our deserved power. I'm here to represent all of the citizens of this beautiful town, which was founded by the citizens in the year 1670 and named Simsbury. Although we, the citizens, greatly outnumber the handful of mighty pens running our town, it's a mere fraction of the actual power that they possess in their pens. It is why we, the citizens, must all group together and become one loud voice of concern. I'm standing here for all the citizens, and though I'm talking in a tempered voice, the message in our hearts is truly a scream for help. Together we say, don't raise the budget. I tell you, don't raise the budget. Again, we tell you, don't raise the budget. For we don't need our politicians with their mighty pens telling us Simsbury citizens to buckle down one more time, work harder, for there's more and more money we want, which means more and more taxes coming your way so we can raise our pay. According to statistics, 3 out of 10 people living in Simsbury are struggling just to keep up with their bills. Most of us are finding that the town budget is strangling our ability to enjoy our citizenship, Why must Simsbury be number one as the highest taxed town in the Farmington Valley when we're not number one in areas that we should be, as our school system and its academic proficiency? Shouldn't we also be more concerned that our citizens aren't being unfairly overburdened? I don't have time to list all of the actual facts and numbers or calculations that would clearly show there's a need to stop this outrageous, overbearing money grab that our town leaders seem to be grabbing year by year. Hear me, fellow citizens. Say it loudly and say it clearly. Don't raise the budget. Again, we say, don't raise the budget. As the song sung by the Beatles quotes and warned us, if you drive a car, they'll tax the street. If you try to sit, they'll tax your seat. If you get too cold, they'll tax the heat. If you take a walk, they'll tax your feet, for they are the taxmen. And last line of the song is also important. Don't ask them what they want it for. They might just ask you for more, for they're the taxmen. The pen may be mightier than the sword, but it's not mightier than the voting booths. Vote the current politicians out.
Thank you. Is that all? I don't want to cut you off. Okay. Well, I appreciate that the Girl Scouts are here.
Any more public audience, Kevin?
Yes, yes. Oh, my apologies. Oh, please.
Good evening. For the record, I'm David Bush, Chairman of the Cultural Park and Rec Commission, and I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk to you this evening. I was unfortunately out of town last weekend at a family wedding when I missed what a great way to spend a weekend. Missed the budget forum, and so first of all, thank you for all. I watched the whole thing start to finish, and you guys you have better ways to spend a weekend, that's for sure. However, there is a very serious issue that was raised after the initial budget presentation was made, and that concerns whether or not the revenue fund should continue or whether the operation of the golf course and the similar programs at Simsbury Farm should be put back into the general fund. What was interesting was the question was asked, why doesn't the fund work? But no one waited long enough to hear the answer, and I know that a number of members of this panel, including both Mike Payne and Sean, you know why it doesn't work. It doesn't work because the town, a number of years ago, right when the deficit started, shifted certain expenses and costs into the fund, that we are essentially almost the only town revenue fund that's allowing those kind of expenses to go against the fund bottom line. If you were to look at the numerous emails that my cohort Jerry Wetchen has forwarded to you both last week and over the weekend, I got those as well, you would see how the numbers work. Basically, you're subsidizing us this year to the tune of about $290, but the transfers and the administrative expenses total about $340,000. So if those were taken out as they should be, this fund would operate properly. Sean, you and I have sat on more subcommittee meetings than I'd care to. Yep. We identified the problem. We also identified the solution, but due to the political climate at the time, we couldn't get that solution through, either whether it was the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Finance. Before you consider dismantling this and going back to a general fund where we are going to have to fight for every dollar for the gem of the town, which generates revenue, which is the golf course, and that you have that documentation, I would at least ask you, one, let's talk about it again, because we have the numbers, we have the data, we can show you the fund works, and let's fix it. Let's do what every other town, some 30 towns in the state have, a revenue fund that is properly structured. It will work properly and will allow us to then operate our programs and or golf course or both in a very professional manner, and especially as Amy alluded to, where you can really track the costs, the marketing, the expenditures, so you really know is a good job being done running this course. Someone alluded to by Ms. Coe is that we want transparency. The revenue fund provides us that. The general fund will not. The general fund, you're just not going to see the kind of data coming out telling you how much are we making And is this a good program or a bad program? Please consider that before making that decision to go into the general fund. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your service.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Anybody else for public audience tonight? Okay, then let's turn to our first presentation. I asked the Girl Scouts to join us today because tomorrow marks their 107th anniversary or birthday. I've got a Daisy Scout at home. My daughter's 6 years old. And the best part about having a Daisy Scout is I've got someone on the inside to sell me cookies. So we're very excited about that.
You didn't bring any, though, did you?
No. Did any of you bring us any cookies? It's okay.
That'd be influence. Yeah,
Fair enough. What I like to ask the girls to do, for those of you that are going to be sharing some words with us, if you were to just stand up along the wall, and we'll pass a microphone around in just a moment. Melissa, would you mind grabbing the mic? Thank you.
What is the actual number? Because it's not 3:30.
Wonderful. I'm going to, I've prepared a proclamation, which I'll be giving to you, and I'll read the proclamation, and then I'll turn it over to you, and I'd love to hear what the Girl Scouts have meant to all of you. So my proclamation says, whereas March 12, 2019 marks the 107th anniversary of Girl Scouts of the USA, the largest leadership program for girls in the world, and whereas Girl Scouts offers girls 21st century programming in science, technology, engineering, and math, the outdoors, entrepreneurship, and beyond, helping girls develop invaluable life skills. And whereas Girl Scouts welcomes girls of all backgrounds and interests who want to develop the courage, confidence, and character to make the world a better place. And whereas the Girl Scout Gold Award, the highest and most prestigious award in Girl Scouting, calls on Girl Scouts in grades 9 through 12 to take on projects that have a measurable and sustainable impact on a community by first assessing a need and designing a solution. And whereas today there are more than 50 million women who are Girl Scout alums and 2.6 million girls and adults who are current members, now therefore I, Eric Wellman, First Selectman of Simsbury, Connecticut, do hereby applaud the Girl Scout movement and Girl Scouts of Connecticut for providing girls with a safe, inclusive space where they can hone their skills and develop leadership abilities. And I declare Tuesday, March 12, 2019 to be Girl Scout Day in Simsbury.
Girl Scout alum that I am.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'd love to
All right, now we're going to listen to you.
Hello, we are Troop 66295. Most of us are 10 or 11 years old. We come from Squadron 9 School in Simsbury and are in the 5th grade. This troop was started in 2013 when we were in kindergarten. As a troop, we decided our community project was to create a sandwich club.
Recently, we started this project called the Sandwich Club. You're probably wondering, what is a Sandwich Club? A Sandwich Club is where we make bag lunches for the homeless shelter called South Park Inn in Hartford.
To date, we have made approximately 185 bagged lunches in three sessions of Sandwich Club. This is important because at Sandwich Club, we don't care about how many lunches we make. What really matters is making the world a better place.
We are doing the Sandwich Club to earn our Bronze Award. To earn our Bronze Award, we must create a sustainable project that will help our community.
The week of Sandwich Club, in the mornings, we go over the announcements and we invite the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders to join us. Then, when the day arrives, first we greet our volunteers and thank them for coming to help.
Next, we explain what happens and divide into groups. The first step in the sandwich making process is putting water into brown paper bags. Then we add oranges, carrots, chips, cookies, and make PB&J sandwiches. Then we add them to the bags and finally add a napkin.
We are paying for the Sandwich Club ingredients by earning money and asking for food donations. We are also earning money by selling Girl Scout cookies. The ingredients we are using are peanut butter, jelly, bread, chips,
plastic water bottles, clementines, cookies, paper and plastic bags.
After a troop leaves our school, we will hand off the sandwich making club to a younger Girl Scout troop to run. We will give a binder with instructions about how to run the club. This is what makes the project sustainable.
Thank you so much for listening to us about our Bronze Award project presentation. Feel free to join us at Sandwich Club on March 29th from 3:30 to 4:30 at Squadron Line School. Hope to see you there. You can't buy happiness, but you can make it at Sandwich Club.
All right.
Nice job. Great.
Nice job.
This is wonderful. Thank you so much. And what? Yeah. Thanks
For
so
sure.
much for being
Thanks
here
for
tonight.
coming in.
Anytime. Please come.
You guys don't want to stay for the budget, for sure?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Watch a bunch of adults fight about a revenue fund.
It's my first volunteer job in Simsbury.
So we're going to move on now to our second presentation tonight, which is a presentation by the Recycling Committee, and we're going to be hearing about the Fill-It program proposal. So Mary Turner will be presenting tonight.
Mary Turner, 11 Barter Drive, Simsbury. First, I would like to thank the members of the Recycling Committee and our technical consultant, Wally Banzif, for his contributions to this program. Without them, we couldn't have accomplished this. Okay, thank you. All right. Oh. Our landfills and oceans are full of empty water bottles. This is more than one bottle every 3 days, nearly 11 every month, and boy, does that add up fast. Bottles kill marine animals of all kinds. It's hard to believe, but plain water outnumbers all other categories. Many businesses are anxious to participate as customer foot traffic will increase when people come in to fill water bottles. As you see, we have already identified a website, and of course, we're not there yet with a location on the town website, but it has been, I've been told that it is not a difficult process to add a page to the town website to identify. There is no app planned at this time. This concept came to me while I was visiting in D.C., because the Metro DC has this plan in place. They did have an app as well as a web page, but they have recently taken down the app because they found it to not be as successful, and the web page remains and has been very mobile and can easily be added to as people join. So therefore, my plan is not to have an app added to this program. And here, why pay so much more for a possibly inferior product? And we can save on an average of $260 a year. Now, I very seldom hear about the risks with water bottles. And as you see here, the antimony is a big concern, as well as the BPA. And BPA has been banned from children's water bottles and teethers and so forth. But there's a good reason. It does mimic estrogen, and there has been quite a few studies on the fact that hormones have been, it has been mimicking the hormones and thereby actually creating issues with fertility. The big don'ts. And there's a very good reason why they say not to put them in, the chemicals in the plastic water bottles do break down. And when it says don't leave your water bottle in your car, it does heat up, but don't also leave your water bottle in the sun. Now, there's a plan for advertising and signage, which can be accommodated very easily. And these stickers are, there's a sticky part on the front of the face of yours, of the logo, and it would be applied to the inside of a store just as you enter the door, so everyone would see right off that this is a participating business. And customer foot traffic is the name of the game if you are a brick and mortar. And these are the 4 wins. It's healthy, it's affordable, it's green, and it's convenient. Those dollar figures mean that bottled water is more than 770 times more expensive than tap water. Of course, not all water consumed will be bottled water. These statistics are from the American Water Organization. No matter what the color is, the refillable bottles are green. And it's a 4 times win. What's not to like? And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Other questions?
Like a win.
Yes,
All right,
please.
you've approached some commercial establishments in town,
I have.
and what's the feedback that you've gotten?
Well, it's very favorable. And I'll give you an example. I went into one establishment. He sold hamburgers. And at their counter, when they order, there was about a 3 feet by 3 feet area where they had all bottled water for sale at the tune of $2.19 each. And so I approached the person, the manager, the store manager, and I said, I explained what the program was, and I said, would you be willing to participate if someone came in with their water bottle, personal water bottle, and asked you to fill it? And of course, in this state, from what what my understanding is, there is a law that you are not required to purchase anything in order to get water. But saying that, people need to be encouraged to do this. So I asked the manager, how would you feel? I said, and I pointed to the collection of water bottles. I says, you will be losing revenue in that area. How would you feel? And of course, I did point out that the aroma of, they had some freshly baked muffins in front of him. I says, and I'm asking you for water. How do you feel about that? And he says, and I says, maybe I'll have a muffin. What do you think? And he says, sure. He says, it's a win-win. It's a green thing to do. And he says, I have no problem with it, even if they didn't buy anything. So he was very encouraged. Multiply that by 4, because that's what I did. I went to 4 different establishments. That person was he was so encouraged with this project, he wanted to attend, but he had another commitment in another state. And he's part of a chain store, so he had to go to New York this evening. But just saying that, he was that encouraged that he wanted to attend this presentation, because he really was encouraged and enthusiastic about the plan. So.
Thank you.
Sorry, have you finished?
Yeah.
Mary, do the participants have to buy any special equipment, a dispenser that looks like a water fountain or
No,
anything?
if you're going to say any restaurant, say a Harvest Bakery, I'll just throw that out. They all have water fountains.
Right.
Because they're washing dishes, they're rinsing their hands, or whatever. That's already a filtered water, tap water, okay? All they have to do is take the container to that faucet, fill it, and give it back.
So no cost to the,
No, absolutely no cost. And most establishments have filtered water.
Right.
And as pointed out in the slides, tap water is very stringently regulated compared to bottled water. You really don't know what you're drinking when you buy bottled water. And someone also told me, well, if I go to the airport, I've got to buy bottled water. And once I got past the check-in, I had to go and get water, and it cost me almost $5. It was this fancy water bottle. And I says, well, all you had to do is bring an empty personal water bottle with you. The ATF, they're not going to say anything because it's empty. All they have to do is open it, empty. So when you get past that line, then you can go in and fill your water bottle. And at the airport, there are many refillable stations. And they show the bottle there, as well as we have 2 right now. I think that they're going to be in the library, getting them. We're in there. But we have one down the hallway here on the left, and we have one just up the stairs also where you can fill your water bottle.
Mary, is the thought that there would be a subpage on the town website with a list of these businesses?
Yes.
Just a thought, it could be worth also sharing that list with the bike folks to publicize as well, because I
Yes.
think it could be a really nice partnership.
Well, I have approached the Culture Park and Recreation, Tom Tyberski, who identified already what locations on the Greenway, et cetera, all the parks, where they already have water fountains. And we're able to maybe add a faucet. That we're still working on it, because that does mean making an adaptation to the existing pipes, but that is in the works. But I think that definitely those locations that already have water will be on the map.
Super. Any other questions?
No, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you to you and the Recycling Committee for bringing this to our town.
Well, appreciate it, and what would be the next?
Okay. We'll move on now to the first Selectmen's report and then the Town Manager's report. I wanted to share that Betsy Gara from COST and Amy Patterson from the Connecticut Land Conservation Council will be coming to our March 25th Board of Selectmen meeting to discuss issues that are the subject of state legislation that might also be of interest to Simsbury. I'm also inviting Senator Whitgos and Representative Hampton. The purpose of the conversation is to determine if the Board of Selectmen wants to, certainly we can learn more about these issues, but possibly take a position to advocate for or against any of these proposals if we want to. Statewide issues with possible local interest include, but are not limited to, proposals that would require towns to pay for a portion of teacher pension costs, compel the merger of smaller school districts, allow towns to impose a tax of up to 1% on the sale of property for the acquisition and stewardship of open space, reintroduce tolls in Connecticut, allow for active management of our state's bear population. I'm sure there are others, but these were some issues that I know I've been contacted about from residents that are an opportunity for this board to ask questions about and learn more about at our next meeting. An update from the Planning Department. A new restaurant will be moving into the 1820 House, the former location of Metro Bis. The new operator has filed for a special exception with the Zoning Commission to change the type of liquor license for the facility. There's a public hearing on April 1st, and I'm not at liberty at the moment to share the name of the restaurant, which I know is a question on everybody's mind at the moment. Landworks will be breaking ground on 48 townhouses associated with the Highcroft development off of Powder Forest Drive. And I'd also like to welcome Lighthouse Design as a new business at 10 Jim Gallagher Way. Earlier this year, the Board of Selectmen voted unanimously for Belden Forest to join the Old Growth Forest Network. In doing so, Simsbury became the first community in Connecticut to apply for this designation. The mission of the network is to designate at least one publicly accessible forest in each county to become a future old-growth forest. The designation is not legally binding. It's a statement of intent to let the forest evolve naturally. Belden Forest will continue to have hiking trails that are maintained to provide for safety, and a formal dedication will be planned at Belden for this fall. On Thursday, March 28th, there'll be the Connecticut premiere of The Lost Forests of New England at 7:30 p.m. at Cinestudio. That's at 300 Summit Street in Hartford. The 2018 film features footage of rare ancient forests, and the filmmaker will be participating in a panel discussion after the showing. The Community for Care is hosting a conversation on eating disorders this Wednesday, March 16th at 6:30 at the Simsbury Public Library. One of the panelists will be a local teenager and author of Changing Ways, a new book in which she shares her personal experience. The Alzheimer's Association is presenting 10 Warning Signs of Alzheimer's, a program at the Simsbury Public Library. That's March 26th from 5:30 to 7:30. And a light dinner will be served starting at 5:30. And they do ask for an RSVP at 800-272-3900. Each year, SafeWise shares its list of America's 100 safest cities, and this year Simsbury ranked 30th on that list. Connecticut had 14 towns make the list, which is the second most towns of any state in the country. And I wanted to, glad we have the chief in the room, I wanted to thank the Simsbury Police Department for all that you do on crime prevention in our community. And that's my report. Maria?
Great, thank you. I have a very brief report for you this evening. Under Board of Selectmen business, just a couple of reminders regarding the 1920 budget process. Following adoption of your budget, we are scheduled to present the Board of Selectmen budget to the Board of Finance next Tuesday, March 19th. That meeting will be held at 5:45 p.m. here in the main meeting room of Town Hall. In the event that we do need additional budget discussion beyond this evening, excuse me, we will need to schedule a special meeting later this week to complete your deliberations. A second reminder is that the Board of Education is presenting their budget to the Board of Finance tomorrow evening, also at 5:45 p.m., but that will be held in the Board of Education conference room on the third floor of this building. Amy and I will also be reviewing our health insurance fund and our debt service and capital analysis with them on Tuesday. Some of that we shared with you at your budget workshop on Saturday, and this was our first opportunity since that time to share it with the Board of Finance. For departmental news and notes, the Simsbury Farms Ice Rink is now closed for the season. Yesterday was their last day of operation for the season. We'd like to thank all of our patrons for their support this year. Residents are asked to provide any feedback about the rink or ideas that they may have for next year's programming to the department, and they can contact staff at 860-658-3836. And just a reminder that now is the time to sign up for summer swim lessons and day camps, and that folks can get information about that at simsburyrec.com. And lastly, a reminder about the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving Greater Together Listening Tour event. You may recall this was originally scheduled to occur in early February, but due to a snowstorm, that's been rescheduled for this Thursday, March 14th at 5:30 p.m. That event will be held at the Simsbury Public Library. This, again, is a really neat opportunity. Communities and the foundation's area, they have set aside $100,000 for each community. $50,000 will be able to be used in the near future, with the remaining $50,000 held in perpetuity and an endowment for future projects. So again, I think this is a great opportunity for them to hear about what matters most to our community and how those dollars could be best used, and would encourage folks to come on out for that on Thursday night.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Selectmen action. Item A is tax refund requests. Is there a motion effective March 11th, 2019, to approve the presented tax refunds in the amount of $2,095.12 and to authorize Town Manager Maria Capriola to execute the tax refunds?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. Item B, so staff has negotiated a successor collective bargaining agreement with IBPO Local 458. That's the union representing our police officers. The union ratified the contract on March 4th. To take effect, the contract also needs to be ratified by the Board of Selectmen, and if we take no action, it will take effect automatically in 30 days. Maria, can I ask you to provide a summary?
Sure, absolutely. So this successor collective bargaining agreement would be for 3 years. A couple of the key highlights were noted in the cover memo. General wage increases were 2.5 for year 1 and 2.35 for years 2 and 3. We did negotiate some plan design changes for health insurance. Notably, they were increased copays for prescription drugs, office and hospital visits, and specialty services. I would like to point out that the health insurance cost was actually one of the most significant cost drivers in this particular 3-year agreement. As you saw from the budget workshop, we're now projecting much larger increases than we had in the past. So that was a cost driver. There were some savings in plan design changes, but again, those plan design changes were enough to overcome the overall premium increases that we are anticipating. In this agreement, also, we've provided one additional holiday for each member of the bargaining unit in exchange for changes in language regarding mandatory training. As you'll recall, we had a number of unresolved matters related to compensation for officers involved in training during the regularly scheduled hours. So this will resolve those matters as well as improve the chief's ability to schedule officer training. We've also provided additional time for rendering our grievance responses. The timeframes were a bit aggressive, and so we've extended those timeframes out a bit. We've introduced an optional quartermaster system for uniforms. And while we shortened the length of time for existing employees contributing to the OPEB trust, we were able to increase the contribution that new hires will make. This was important to us because this particular bargaining unit had a different amount than the rest of our workforce, and we wanted to get some consistency there for the new hires moving forward, and the union did agree to that in exchange for the concession in the short term. This particular contract represents 37 full-time officers. We have for you in the packet completed a full contract cost analysis of the 3-year agreement with all costs accounted for. We have also included for you the signed tentative agreement. And since this contract was bargained in good faith with guidance from both the Board of Selectmen and Police Commission, I would recommend the board voting on option A, which would be to approve the agreement and to authorize me to enter into the successor collective bargaining agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any questions or discussion? Is there a motion effective March 11th, 2019, to authorize Town Manager Maria Capriola to execute the proposed successor collective bargaining agreement between the Town of Simsbury and IBPO Local 458, which shall enter into effect retroactively from July 1, 2018, and expire on June 30th, 2021?
So move.
Second.
Any discussion?
Just a quick comment that, again, thank you for the negotiating side, and Chief, please thank the officers. Obviously, we appreciate what they do. It's never always an easy thing to have to negotiate with folks in town, but I've always appreciated through my 8 years the professionalism that your team brings to the table, and I think this is a reasonable agreement for everybody involved, including the taxpayers. So, but again, appreciate what your team does every day on the road, so thank you.
Yeah.
Also, just let them know in the commission, this is the first for Maria and our transition, and respecting the process has changed and all, and respecting the people involved, and it was cordial, and it was, moved forward in the appropriate manner. So I appreciate that as well.
Absolutely.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, and that motion carries. Item C is the proposed social media and website use policy. So that policy is in your packet. This came out of conversations originally with the Economic Development Work Group. It would establish standards and procedures for the creation of social media and website accounts for the town. This board referred the policy to boards and commissions that have a website or social media presence for input, and we received minor feedback from the Technology Task Force, which was incorporated into the final document. Any questions or anything staff wanted to add? Okay.
No.
Is there a motion effective March 11th, 2019, to adopt the social media and website use policy as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And that motion carries. I'm wondering if it would make sense for us to pass or introduce a motion for the Tourism Committee, because to my knowledge, they're the only appointed committee that has a Facebook page that is pretty active, and we could pass a motion basically allowing for them to continue that Facebook page, of course, under the guidelines of the policy with, with staff support.
Does that need a separate motion? I mean, there's lots of,
Per the new policy, it does.
are you sure they're the only one that has a?
Maria?
Sure. So, again, to our knowledge, the only committee at this time that has an active social media presence is the Tourism Committee. We do have a number of departmental accounts that are managed by staff in terms of the content. And then the second committee, if in fact, you'd like to proceed with authorizing their recycling committee to do their Fill It initiative, a similar motion may also be appropriate in terms of authorizing them to have essentially a web page within our web page.
Okay. So would there be,
Does it require, prior to the use of the town asset, does it require them to go through, other than just saying I complied with this document?
well, I think it's a good question, Chris. I think the biggest difference, at least for the tourism Facebook page, is that town staff, a member of town staff that Maria appoints, would need to have access to the Facebook page to be able to, make any changes.
I'm just thinking, I'm using them as an example, but
Yeah.
thinking on a go-forward basis, just saying, sure, you have access, have you read this? Just make sure we go through, and you actually have a working understanding of what's right and what's wrong, and what our expectations are.
Yeah, so the way what we had discussed at the work group level was that for organizational sort of departmental pages, that would continue to run through the manager's office, but that for our various advisory committees, since they are appointed by you, that the thought was that the Board of Selectmen would be the appropriate entity to say whether or not an advisory committee could or couldn't have a web or social media presence.
Sure. Like the recycling committee.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay,
Exactly.
I get it.
Okay.
Well, that's what I was thinking of, if we needed a separate motion for them, so that's great.
Yeah, so I'll try to word it. Would there be a motion to approve a subpage for the recycling committee to promote the Tap It or Fill It initiative?
Fill it? I think it's, yeah.
Oh,
So
what?
moved.
Sorry, the Fill It initiative, and for the tourism committee to continue their Facebook page.
So moved.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And that motion carries. Moving on to item D, which is the fiscal year 1920 budget discussion and possible adoption. So there were a number of some changes that were made and some points of clarification that were made since our budget workshop. And I wanted to go through those before we get into sort of the meat of the budget discussion. The first was a change to the CNR, and I'll let Maria summarize that.
So on your desks this evening, we provided replacement pages to the CNR fund. Upon further review, staff is recommending there were two proposed projects for public works in the CNR fund for year one of the CNR plan that we proposed funding with Town Aid Road. One was the salt brine system, and the other being the replacement front end loader. Upon further review, we would recommend pushing those two projects out to year two of the CNR. This would not have an impact on the general fund nor the mill rate, but again, after staff review, further staff review, we just are recommending pushing those two projects out to year two of the CNR and have provided a budget book replacement page to that effect.
Is Town Aid Road going to be there next year?
I have not heard otherwise. In the governor's proposed budget, there is funding for 1920 and 2021.
Okay. Okay.
That's an easy one for them to go after, even though they shouldn't. But we'll keep our eye on that.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah. So another topic of conversation was debt service and capital and some revised charts.
Correct, sure, thank you. So the conversation and discussion at the budget workshop was incredibly helpful. I did want to point out that the numbers we had provided to you at the workshop had included our sewer debt in that analysis. Subsequently, Amy and I had learned that this board and the Board of Finance has not seen that typically. So we did revise some charts for you and provided those to you. We've also made some hard copies available for the public. And a couple of key points is that without the sewer debt, the 6.7% target line, we do meet that in most years. Would you mind pulling up the charts? I'm just going to have Amy pull up the charts for us.
Yeah.
Thank you. So this is showing our debt service without our sewer debt. That target line of 6.7% is the blue line that you can see there. But again, there still are a couple of challenges that we have with that. Do you mind advancing to the next slide?
Well, before you go off that, so that's the one we all remember. That's what we've seen
Correct.
year over year. So when we were talking about it last week, and we all had a memory of the chart, this is what we've all seen from the Board of Finance, and this has been correct, right?
Right.
So, and it's not that we're ignoring the sewer debt. The sewer debt is paid for by the sewer users, and we've just not included it here, even though ultimately the town is on the hook for the sewer debt, as we all know. Right?
You're segueing very nicely into the next chart for me. Thank you. That's okay. Would you mind pulling up
I'll
the
be
one
quiet
with?
now.
No, it's okay. That's fine. Would you mind pulling up the one with sewer debt? Oops. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah.
I don't like the baseline need one.
So this, so this is showing, again, this was the chart that we had demonstrated to you during the budget workshop, and this does show our sewer debt. Again, we apologize for including that. Again, we didn't realize that hadn't been included in the past, but Sean is correct, and we did confirm with bond counsel our understanding. So ultimately, the sewer debt is town debt. That is looked at in terms of our overall bond rating when we do receive that from the rating agencies. And if for some reason the sewer fund became insolvent or was not able to make their debt service payments, ultimately the general fund and essentially the mill rate would have to make up the difference and make those payments on the town's behalf. You know, moving forward, we've had some discussions, and we believe that it probably would be prudent to at least to show this to you all on an annual basis, to at least show it to the Board of Finance on an annual basis. And we're also going to be recommending to the Board of Finance. They have just started to work on revisions to a debt management policy, and because of this issue, we do think it would be prudent for them to at least address what they're comfortable with in terms of sewer debt within that larger policy context. So that is something we'll be encouraging them to address through their debt management policy.
So from a historical perspective, we've always been in a position, I imagine, somewhat like this,
I would think so.
where the graphs are representing this. But has there ever been a period in where we've been close to the line of having a concern with the fund and its solubility?
For sewer, not that I'm aware of.
Best that we're aware.
Yeah.
I hate to
Not
look
that
to
I'm
Chris
aware of.
Kelly, but like.
Our historian,
Yeah, no,
Right, or
but,
Sean.
yeah.
I mean, the folks on the sewer commission have done a really thoughtful job and analysis over the years of calculating that rate. You know, we have a 20-year note from the Clean Water Fund for our sewer plant, so we upgraded early. That commission has done a really thoughtful job of making sure that they're covering their debt payment and their operating expenditures. We've also got some, I don't want to call it revenue, but I guess it is revenue from other towns, right, because of our
We have two
excess
customers.
capacity.
Excuse me, we do
we've-
have two customers, correct?
Yeah, I mean, if we were to lose those, you know, they might have to reassess it, but at the end of the day, we're charging, what, $335, $350, whatever it is, on an annual sewer basis, $352. So, you know, again, the first hook would be to raise that. The second would be to,
So when the agencies come in, and this is more for I think for the public at large, when the agencies come in and the look-back period is probably very, very minimal as far as our current knowledge of how things look, but the forward-looking picture and the current solvency and the projections, they must take that in consideration and say, yes, this is why we give you the ratings that you do. But then on a true look-back period, if as long as it's relative to the current cost of capital and the types of technologies and types of investments we're making, it must be taken into consideration as well that we've never actually been near a concern, and that our trends back we've always met our liabilities and going forward as well.
Right, and we do have a very good fund balance within the sewer enterprise
Sure.
fund, which helps to weather, some storms. So the fund is, I believe, in a good position.
Yeah, so, so looking at things like this, let's just be clear that we shouldn't be concerning people too much at all.
I mean, in reality, if we did include the sewer debt in our capital calculation from a percentage standpoint, we're just a shade over 8, right? I mean, we're not exactly Hartford here. So, we're going from 6.5 to 8, which in our world is a big deal, but in the
could
grand scheme
considered-
of other municipalities,
yeah,
we're still
Could be
very
considered
fairly
acceptable
responsible,
elsewhere, yeah.
at least in my understanding. We're not
Well,
out there using
I get the
credit
Board of
card.
Finance's concerns.
Any other questions or conversation on this?
I'm just going to add, we have one more chart.
Stop stealing our thunder.
That's all right. So this is the topic that we were discussing with you, which is having cash for capital for our baseline needs. And part of the process that we've now been that we began with trying to develop a 6-year plan for the CNR fund or for our smaller capital needs. So there are 7 sort of larger categories that I would characterize that are going to make up those baseline needs. Paving of our roads, and this isn't major reconstruction of our roads, this is just simply, routine maintenance to keep our roads in good condition. It's our sidewalks, it's our bike trails, it's our parks and parks facilities costs, it's our fleet, it's our town buildings and our school buildings. And again, these would be sort of those routine purchases that we just need to make on an ongoing basis. Mechanicals for the ice rink, patrol vehicles for our police department, a large, dump/plow truck for public works on an annual basis. Those are essentially those routine capital needs that ideally we wouldn't be bonding for. As I had mentioned, we've been working on quantifying those 7 larger categories. We have a number of studies underway. We've recently completed some. So a very, very rough, very preliminary $2.5 million sort of baseline capital needs. Those are needs that aren't going to go away year to year. So this issue that we were chatting with you about during the budget workshop in terms of again, with existing debt service not having room for cash for capital for about a 6-year period is what we were projecting. So this chart just sort of illustrates to you what we were trying to discuss, that if we were also wanting to continue to fund our baseline capital needs in cash, if we were to do so with debt service over about the next 6-year period, starting with 21-22, we would be over that line. Again, our understanding and speaking with some folks, both on the Board of Selectmen as well as Board of Finance and a former finance director, is that typically we've tried to keep both cash for capital as well as our debt service below that target line. But as you can see, with debt service that's been committed, that would be very difficult to do. So this will, I think, have to be, some very, serious policy conversations in some of the upcoming budget years in terms of how do we sort of tackle this problem. If we don't have cash to pay for some of these baseline needs, to think that we might not be able to make any baseline purchases for a 6-year period, I think is, unrealistic. So what happens is things continue to get pushed out, they continue to get deferred, or we're bonding for smaller projects with then perpetuate sort of a cycle of bonding. So again, this is sort of that larger policy issue that we talked about at the workshop, and we thought maybe this chart might help illustrate that discussion a little better.
Does this graphic represent the CNR of the past as well? Or how is CNR accounted for here?
Sure. So we included that as part of the $2.5 million.
So that's the 460, that's the
Right.
465?
Right.
Because that's paid for out of the operating budget now. So while it's cash for capital, it's technically not part of this.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If we kept the 465 spending.
Right.
So those green bars would come down. So
About 2.1 if you looked at it that way, yeah.
So we still have roughly $500,000 of cash for capital annually on our historical CNR funding.
Yes, if we were to continue with that.
The reason I bring it up is because we all knew when we approved Henry James and we were looking at the senior center, and since I've been on this board, that we were going to get to that purple bar there, or that pink then purple bar, and we were going to hit the 7%. So not new information that we were going to hit up against it, and it was going to be challenging from a cash standpoint, because we've enjoyed for the last, 6-8 years, a substantial payment. The Board of Finance has funded a number of items through year-end transfer for us. And then, again, instead of bonding, they've talked about funding from a cash flow basis in the following year as well. So, said another way, that rides over, right? Because if we're staying at 7%, there's theoretically no more cash.
No more cash for capital,
Yeah,
yes, sorry.
absolutely.
Yes, correct,
Unless,
right.
unless they choose to allocate the additional collection to other places. So it's not to say there is no cash, but in our standard how we've accounted for this in the past, it does put substantial pressure on us.
Right.
The reason I'm belaboring this point is because we have to think long and hard about the capital we approve tonight and ultimately send to the Board of Finance, because that's the purple bar, right? Not the pink bar, the purple bar later on. So whatever we do this year further exacerbates the problem. And if we're okay with that, that's fine, but when we make our decisions, we have to prioritize not only this year, but are we putting projects next year and the following year in jeopardy as well?
Yep.
We don't get to decide whether we go above 7% or not, the Board of Finance does. Yep.
And we did, for the purposes of the projection, include the 1920 projects that were proposed to be funded for the Board of Ed with bonds. We did put that in the projection for this particular analysis. But beyond that, yeah.
And then the green up there, so we're talking about the first bar, right? The brown, what is that, gray, and then the green? And the cash that's on there is what's in our packet today?
The green and...
The one all the way to the left. 2020?
No, so the future, if we do bonding in 2020, the effect hits in 2022.
No, I understand that, but as far as bless you, as far as the pages in our book that talk about the cash.
The cash available for capital to get to the 6.7?
Right.
No, that's consistent with prior year based on Board of Finance guidance.
So how much, okay. So we do need to take into account the total, because the 465 for CNR plus the additional cash. So what we choose to pay for cash this year impacts out years as well. Because once the cash goes away, we have to decide,
Right.
again, was this the right year to spend the cash on it, or do we accelerate other projects? Or do we hold that, recommend to the Board of Finance, we pay off debt, we don't bond. Additionally, we take down some of the bonds, potential bonding that we're going to do.
Yeah.
There's a couple ways out of this.
That's an option, too.
Because flexibility is always a beautiful thing. Cool. We're going to be here for a while. Thank you for putting this together.
Yeah.
This really helps.
So next, I wanted to ask Maria to walk us through the healthcare analysis and
Thank you.
and the four options that you are sharing with us.
Great, thank you. Just going to pull that up on the screen for you.
This one's even more exciting than the debt one.
Thank you. I know it's a little hard to read on the screen, so we did provide hard copies at your desk this evening. We did provide a hard copy of the analysis, the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance that we reviewed with you at your budget workshop. But then we've gone a step further, and as I mentioned to you, this is an evolving issue. We had budgeted around a 9 to 9.5% increase in the proposed budget for a health insurance increase when we saw some initial projections as we were working through budget development regarding current year and next year. We then started to take a pretty deep dive into the historical data on this particular fund and saw that the fund essentially had been in a deficit position as far back as 13-14, meaning we had not been collecting enough in premiums from both the employer and employee to cover the outgoing claims. So based on that analysis and working with our new employee benefits consultants, we've been able to develop 4 different scenarios to help start, getting us to a rate that's more appropriate, as well as to start trying to build back up the reserves to a target amount. So what we have for you are 4 scenarios. Scenario 1 would be what we would call the low end of the range of expected claims. This would also begin to build up fund balance to our short-term target. Our long-term target reserve would be about $3.6 million. But again, understanding some of the challenges and how far we are behind on this, and speaking with our consultants, we came up with a short-term target reserve of about $2.8 million. So scenario 1, again, would be expecting the low end of the range of expected claims, but also working towards bringing us to that short-term target of 2.8 for the reserve. That would be approximately about a 10.44% increase compared to the 9 to 9.5 we presented through my proposed budget. Scenario 2 would be the mid-range of expected claims. This would also bring reserves up to the short-term target based on our projections. The budgetary impact to the operating budget is a 21.28% increase. Scenario 3 would be the high end of range for expected claims. That would also bring the short-term target to about $2.8 million. That would be an operating budget impact of about 32.12% to this particular expenditure line item. We also prepared something called Scenario 4, which would have an operating budget impact of about 14.48. Scenario 4 would be using the mid-range of expected claims, but would not be adding back to the reserve at this point. So what I would recommend, I mean, again, this is a scenario, it's certainly options to consider. I think that, when we're looking at, pressure on the mill rate and also trying to provide some stability, I'd suggest that we probably most seriously consider Scenario 1 or Scenario 4. But if we are to use Scenario 1 and Scenario 4, in order to use those numbers, I do strongly believe that we would need to use a general fund balance contribution to help essentially shore up this fund and to shore up the reserve. Our projections, if we were to use Scenario 1 and budget the premium increase of 10.44%, is that we would need about a $1.488 million contribution from fund balance to the health insurance fund. If we were to use Scenario 4, we would need approximately about a $934,000 transfer from fund balance to the health insurance fund. One other possibility to offset the transfers out of fund balance would be to consider, based on our budgeted and anticipated tax collection rate, we would most likely have excess revenues at year end for 18-19, as well as if the Board of Finance continues to use that methodology, excess revenues at the end of 19-20. So another possibility could be at year end this year, as well as year end next year, to take some of those revenues that were in excess and transfer that into the health insurance fund to perhaps not have to take as much from fund balance. I will also point out with Scenario 1, because that is the low range of expected claims, that we would be more likely to still have another, substantial increase next year. So this would be getting us there a little more gradually, but we'd see that, substantial increase over 2 years, whereas if we were to implement, say Scenario 2, 3, or 4, it's getting our premiums there a little more aggressively. So again, these are just some scenarios we've prepared for your consideration, and would like to take any questions.
Yeah, Maria, the number that's currently in the proposed budget with the 4.09% increase, which number is that currently?
That is none of them. So again, our preliminary projection was around a 9 to 9.5%. But again, we were still working through this issue with the consultants. We were trying to wait for February end-of-month claims to come in to get a little bit of a better picture, as well as then taking into account the historical numbers. So these are our revised estimates based on, again, our review of the fund since 2013-14. So the very preliminary, 9.5% increase in my proposed budget, I don't believe would be sufficient to get the fund to a position where we need it to be. But I also understand that these are very large increases. That has a very significant impact to the operating budget and potentially to the mill rate. And so when looking at the range of options, trying to look at some options that would, again, sort of maybe gradually implement the rate increases and try to somewhat minimize the impact of these increases to the mill rate.
So, just picking out Scenario 1, just because you left off on it, you're saying that to get us where you feel we need to be, then this is a 2-year project, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And, I always kind of consider, well, how long did it take us to get into this situation? And that's in that Scenario 1, again, is barring anything outside the ordinary from expected claims from how much of a look back? Is it the 2-3 years run that you're expecting?
When we did the look back, we looked at the fund back to 13-14?
Well, 13, yeah.
14?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
So the 10.44% increase in Scenario 1 that we were just, that's on top of the 9%?
Oh, no, I'm
Or
sorry.
that
That's-
includes
that
the
would-
9%?
That would include the 9%.
It's
So
a bump.
really,
Replaces
Okay.
it, right?
It's like a little top up.
Perfect.
It's a top up.
A little, and
Sure.
this is net of the Board of Ed contribution?
correct, right. So if you look, we provided a line that says additional town general fund impact net of BOE contribution. So if we were to do scenario 1, 2, 3, and 4 on premiums alone, so this again would affect the operating budget. Scenario 1 would be about 28,000 above what I presented to you in my proposed budget. Excuse me. Scenario 2 would be about 239,000
Okay.
more.
Yeah, I see where you are.
Yep, scenario 3, 450, and scenario 4, about 106. But again, just in terms of, going with a number that's on the lower end of expected claims and knowing that our reserve is not in a good position, I do feel that that would be risky without a transfer from fund balance. And so I just wanted to be very open and upfront about that I think in order for scenario 1 and 4 to work, we most likely have to either talk about using year-end, revenues or fund balance.
So when we're looking at pressure on the mill rate, on the other side, is the Board of Ed having the same issue that we are, or did they already account for this?
So they budgeted, similar to us, I believe, about a 9% increase, so they will have a similar issue with these scenarios as well.
Okay, so we're looking at pressure on both sides here.
Correct.
Okay.
I mean, that's the challenge, is the Board of Finance transferred $1 million in the current year because we had asked for relief. And the whole idea was that $1 million transfer was going to actually get us lower premiums. Unfortunately, we needed that $1 million just to keep the fund solvent.
Fund
for this
solvent.
year.
Right.
And so we're talking about transferring $2.5 million between this year's and potentially next year's, and the premium increases. Now, to me, and the problem with this business is we never know until it happens, right? So we could get hit with $16 million in claims, and we only budget for 15, so we could go upside down another $1.4 million. So we're in a particularly challenging position here, because if we don't get the transfer, I don't see how we don't go with option 3. If we get the transfer, then I'm more willing to look at the other numbers. Because to me, I mean, we're putting ourselves in an insolvency risk within the first quarter of the plan, the way I look at it, without that transfer or without a substantial increase in premiums, right? I mean, it's both are ideal, but one or the other has to happen in case the year doesn't work out in our favor. That's the challenge with this, and we just don't know until it happens, right?
Correct. Right. Yeah, with scenario 2 or 3, without a transfer from fund balance, I would be more comfortable. But to Sean's point, again, right, I would not recommend scenario 1 or 4 without a transfer from fund balance.
And then again, if we go with the transfer, well, guess what? We just used up all the cash. So by the way, we can't ask for a bunch of cash at the end of this year to solve our cash for capital issues.
Right. Yeah.
So again, this whole debt, and that's what, I mean, again, not to bring it back to the capital, but it is linked. Because whatever decision we recommend here follows right into that conversation. Because there's only so much cash left over.
Is this the type of thing that ever gets corrected mid-year? I mean, do you ever, sort of take the temperature of the fund at the middle of the year and say, this is how we're doing,
Yeah, that's a great question, Cheryl. Thank you. So something that Amy and I previously had been accustomed to was receiving from our employee benefits consultants an analysis actually on a monthly basis, so we could monitor projected claims versus actual claims month over month, year over year. We weren't getting that previously, so that's something with our new consultants. We did implement that in November. We started receiving those monthly reports. That is very helpful for monitoring the fund on an ongoing basis. Moving forward, also, I think we had mentioned this during the workshop, we will begin preparing the first sheet that was in your packet. We will start including this in your quarterly financial budget status reports. Again, so you'll see that on a quarterly basis, and both you and the Board of Finance can at least have a good understanding of where we're at a minimum on a quarterly basis moving forward. Again, hoping to prevent this from happening in the future.
Right. Well, to Chris's point, it's upsetting that, now we're seeing this all in one big pile. That's,
Yeah.
Well, thank God it was uncovered, though.
Yeah.
Exactly. No, I'm
Maria and
not
Amy
complaining. I'm
found
just,
something.
it's kind of shocking.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps, the focus had been right, wrong. I mean, I don't want to place blame, but the focus had been very heavily on the general fund. But I don't think that you all were getting reports from what we've been able to ascertain on the internal service fund on a regular basis. And so for whatever reason, I think this information may have just gotten lost. But I do think it's really important information that you all do need to be seeing, at least on a quarterly basis. And again, Amy and I will be, and have been looking at it on a monthly basis now since November.
So I'm wondering if it would be if the right thing to do would be to have conversation around this now and determine which option we're most comfortable with, or if it would be more helpful to go through the rest of the budget discussion, because that could have implications on which option we ultimately want to go with, depending on what other decisions are made.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Amy, this increase alone chews up almost our entire increased guidance from the Board of Finance,
Sure.
even at the low end,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I mean,
Well, scenario 3 is what, 2.2% budget increase? So yes.
And we have-
I mean, it's not as if we have scenario, I'm sorry, I've lost how many scenarios we have. Not if we have scenario 5, which is to do nothing. I mean, something has to be done. This is not pleasant whatsoever. So, whether you address it right now or address it after, it's still going to be a big, this is going to be a very, very painful budget for the town.
Right, and I would also just like to point out, I mean, I think moving forward, there are some cost containment measures we can also do. It's hard to quantify those at this point. As I mentioned at the budget workshop, we are marketing our stop-loss insurance. I do think that's something we could do better on. Our consultants are going to have the results of that analysis for us in April. So if there are substantial savings to be had, you know, I would recommend that we definitely proceed with changing our carrier on that. Also, with our current consultants, we've engaged in a pretty thorough analysis in anticipation of the contracts. We're going to be negotiating with 5 of our bargaining groups this coming spring and summer. And specialty medications in particular are a very significant cost driver for us on the plans. It's not actually the medical spend. So there are about 5 or 6 potential measures that we could implement that could have savings to the overall fund in upwards of 6 figures. So again, those are some pretty serious conversations I'll be having with our bargaining groups this spring, just, you know, emphasizing the troubles we're having with the fund and, you know, going into this analysis with them and then, you know, seeking some plan design changes. So again, in the long term, I'm hopeful and optimistic that some of that will help us get the fund back on track.
And it's correct that whatever assumption we choose also gets passed on to the participants?
Correct, yes, thank you, right. So our employees, at least on the town side, depending on which plan they're enrolled in, most of our employees are either paying 20% of the premium or 15% of the premium. So when we say that the town would also, we would have a rate increase, the employees would share in that burden as well.
Right. And I say that because we need to be, again, not only we think, obviously thinking about the taxpayers, but our employees as well, because a 10 all the way up to a 32% increase is substantial.
Yeah.
Maria, when you say these numbers are net, is that including the employee contribution or not including the employee contribution?
So this would be the employer contribution for the town,
Employer,
not
okay.
of the Board of Ed contribution.
That being the columns on the right. The columns on the left are all in.
Correct,
Everybody
correct,
contributing.
correct.
And in our book, what is it, tab 18? It's the major medical insurance. That's the number we're talking about, so it's 218 currently in the book, so add 27 to that, give or take.
Right, for scenario one. Oh, I'm sorry, just one other column I didn't point out to you. We did also a rough calculation if we were to, with scenario 1 or scenario 4, make the withdrawal, excuse me, from fund balance, what that would leave in fund balance in terms of a percentage of our overall budget. For that analysis, we did make a note here. We used 1718 unassigned fund balance, and we did not include 1819 or 1920 expected contributions, just because technically we don't budget a planned fund balance contribution. Again, just for the purposes of having an appreciation that if we absolutely did not put anything into fund balance in 1819 or 1920, based on what we currently have, if we were to make those withdrawals and where the budget's going to end up, what would that overall percentage look like? So we wanted to provide those numbers for you as well.
When we go out to bond, how big of an issue is this going to be for the rating agencies?
To see the transfer out?
If we, to show the problem we have and then the potential solutions. Because again, we're good on the debt service side from an historical standpoint, but this is not exactly the fiscal management that we've gone to them with in the past. Because to me, that would also drive the solution here, because if I was sitting on the other end of the table, I'd rather see us admit our mistake, fix our mistake, and position ourselves to be very solvent and stable in the future, especially if I was seeking a AAA rating again. But again, I mean, we have the fund balance to fix this problem, but the rating agencies do not look kindly upon using fund balance to fix operating issues, right?
Have we gotten any signals from the Board of Finance as to how they would treat this?
We have not had a meeting with them since really uncovering all of this. So we will be reviewing this with them tomorrow evening after the Board of Education budget and walking them through the same analysis to see if we can get a sense from them where they might be heading on this issue.
That's going to be fun.
So Eric, my suggestion is we pick a solution, because, quite honestly, how this ultimately gets treated in terms of our threshold is dependent upon that conversation.
Yep.
And it's, if we've begun to coalesce around a number that makes sense mathematically in terms of managing the fund, I would suggest we pick that number now as opposed to coming back to it later.
Agreed.
Did you have a number in mind?
No, I heard a proposal from Sean relative to scenario 3.
I mean, we can either go in with a strong recommendation for a fund balance transfer, which I think this is a very appropriate usage of those funds, and they've done it in the past, and I hope that they will recognize the severity, because again, I think that a responsible increase in the premiums and a fund balance transfer gets us back on stable footing quickly. So I'm comfortable going with either scenario, probably more so scenario 1, because it accounts for the largest fund balance transfer, right? And then the premium increase. If they ultimately decide they want us, or we have a conversation where we need to go up, we do the fund balance transfer and we go up to a higher premium number, again, that's a conversation I think we can have with them after the fact.
Doesn't the Board of Ed have to be on board with the same scenario, or no?
I mean, the Board of Finance can force it from an overall standpoint, right? But they can't force the line item.
Right. So the Board of Ed, just in terms of timing with the budget, so the Board of Education adopted their budget with the 9% increase. And again, I think Matt has encouraged folks that this evolving issue will be reviewed more on Tuesday evening. So again, I don't think that the Board of Education has had a chance yet to sort of digest the information to the extent that you all have.
How, amongst the true professionals who have been considering this, how often did you kick around scenario number 4? How many times did you come back to scenario number 4 relative to, 1 and 4 are the two litmus and banking off each other, benchmarking it. So how often do you guys come back to that one?
For me, I think scenario 4, if we didn't have such a large increase in debt service this year to the operating budget, I would have said, maybe we just try to really tackle this premium increase more so in 1 year. While the debt service number doesn't affect the Board of Finance target, it does affect the overall mill rate impact. And looking at the 21% increase to debt service, it was a little under $850,000. Knowing that we have such a large increase there, I kept coming back to scenario 1.
Same?
In the end, yes, I was more for scenario 4 in the beginning because it makes the fund solvent. And we do have 1.8 million in reserves right now, and it puts us mid-range for the claims. But I do agree with Maria that, given the position we're in, scenario 1 makes sense.
Right. Scenario 1 just puts us in a position where it's going to be a multi-year commitment to sort of getting us back on track.
Yeah.
It also minimizes that if we have a bad year, we don't have to come back and do something midterm on a drastic basis, right? It doesn't eliminate it, but it minimizes it. Scenario 4, again, we're continuing to play with a little bit of fire for a longer period of time, right?
In terms of premiums or the reserve? The reserve?
The reserve, yeah.
Okay.
All right.
And you can take some time and
Yeah.
digest it, think about it. We can always, we'll certainly come back to it when we pull up the spreadsheet after some of these follow-up items in
Yeah.
terms of what you might want to add or take away from the budget. And ultimately, this is a lot to process and digest, and if you want to come back in a few days and make a final decision, I understand and respect that. We can always make a special meeting happen if we need to.
Do you have one of your charts with this in it that has the moving number?
Yes.
Of course.
So when we're going to see that? Very soon.
Okay.
Can we just make one request, instead of the 1,488,579, can we just make it 1.5 if we're gonna
Yeah.
ask for, I mean, come on.
Sure.
It's just round.
The only thing, Maria,
I
is
like clean numbers.
later on, we're going to have to make some decisions as to how much we feel we need to cut. Take a look at the gap we have between where we are and the guidance from the Board of Finance. So I actually think it's healthy for us tonight to pick a number, because it's going to, whether we pick scenario 3 or 5 has a significant impact on what that gap is.
Right.
So I'm thinking we need to pick a scenario.
I agree.
Yeah, I think so.
But I think we can talk to them next week about the fact that, again, we've looked at historical claim and premium numbers, and again, this is outside
Right.
of the guidance that we all talked about in November. This is newer information, and
Absolutely.
again,
Yep.
not absolving ourselves from the 2.5 or the 2.75, but again, this is something I would ask them to reconsider from a percentage increase standpoint.
I would completely agree, and that might speak to the value of picking scenario 1.
Yeah.
Biggest impact, least impact relative to our gap, and then we ultimately defer to the Board of Finance when they have their conversation.
Good. Yeah. Let's use that assumption going into tonight's
Scenario one.
conversation.
Got it.
So the next analysis we wanted to look at was the Parks and Rec consolidation into the general fund.
Correct. So at the budget workshop, you had asked us what it would look like in theory to move all of the Parks and Recreation expenses into the general fund. So sort of the opposite of what we had proposed. Amy, would you mind just speaking to that briefly?
Sure. So just quickly, as you can see with the revised chart, we increased the $3 million in the operating budget to include that of the Parks and Rec Fund. And then down here, you'll see that the mill rate goes up a little bit. I think it was 0.05 mills with the increase to offset the Parks and Rec loss. Everything else remains the same, so you're still at the 4-point increase from what was presented on Saturday. So the only change is the absorption of the loss in the fund through the mill rate.
Can we just get a couple things on the table? Because there's been a lot of debate around numbers and what the fund's been allocated and not, and the chairman was correct. I have been on a number of these commissions. But what has never been accounted for in the special revenue fund is debt service. So to say that that fund is solvent on its own is inaccurate. The taxpayers have been paying for the debt service from that facility. So I understand the golf argument, I understand that we need to have accountability, but that fund has never stood on its own to pay for its capital expenditures in addition to its operating expenditures. So we understand you did an analysis of what the town has put over there. We've tried to lighten that over the years. Again, Chairman Bush was correct. There was a larger number that we recommended with a multi-year plan. Given the challenges we've had with the budget, we were unable to do so. But I think but to say that the cost of the, a number of items that you can argue are benefiting in some way, shape, or form, so we can debate the percentage. Is it 2%? Is it 100%? I don't know what the right number is, and that was one of the challenges. To say that the fund is getting no benefit from town assets is inaccurate. So, and that's always been the challenge. And again, I don't think throwing it into the operating fund is irresponsible. I think it has the potential to increase our culture, parks, and rec funding, because we've always gotten hung up on this debate and this argument of whether they're making money or not. And at the end of the day, that doesn't make sense. We're out providing service, right, for our residents. And yes, there is offsetting golf revenue. But again, Mr. Wetchen and other folks will disagree with me. Golf is not on the rise. Golf is on the decline. So I think this actually insulates this entity and continues to help provide it as a town asset. And I think it removes the potential debate for, well, they made money, they didn't. You can argue with me on capital, you cannot, et cetera. So again, I think at least my vantage point is we're trying to do the right thing. And again, we got an email this weekend. Our recreation budget has been substantially underfunded through the years because we've had essentially an excuse. And I think
And
this
we've always looked at it through that lens
Right.
of, not paying for itself.
Right.
Which I think is starting with the wrong premises. As Sean said, this is a town asset, and Mr. Bush is correct. This is a gem, and
our residents love it and people use it, and that's all great. But it should be accounted for with the rest of our beautiful town assets that we account for, whether it has a revenue stream or not. It's, just like we have fees and other things that we charge for different programs.
There's,
Yeah.
I was just
Go
going to
ahead.
ask a question from an accounting standpoint. There's no reason why we can't continue to have a schedule for the golf course, correct, in terms of expenditures?
Yeah.
There's no reason why we
Yeah,
can't.
so I really like the way you broke it out this year with
We
the
can
different.
absolutely track it via the income statement that I provided on Saturday, and then have it in the general fund. There's nothing in any accounting standards where it says it's not appropriate.
So we're not abandoning transparency, we're not abandoning management of this. We're still going to talk about fees and whether they make sense, but I think we're going to be able to talk about them in a larger context of what are we willing to subsidize for the residents of this community versus, well, are they making money or not, and go cut another 50 grand when you don't have 50 grand to cut. That's not a fair argument necessarily going forward. I think, Jerry previously and Tom have done a phenomenal job of trying to control costs down there, and we're at this point asking them to do something they can't do, at least from my vantage point. Sorry, Chris.
No, I agree with both what Sean and Cheryl has said. And to me, the essence is if we want entrepreneurial management, the reporting can drive that as opposed to where, from an accounting point of view, we put things. And to what you're saying is how we have accounted for this as a separate entity has actually increased confusion, increased complexity, decreased transparency, and actually has gotten in the way of us managing it the way we want to. Or let me say it another way. When we talk about, well, we need to pull this out and put this in and pull this out to make it, self-sustaining, that proves to me it's really not self-sustaining. If we're basically kind of jury-rigging over a number of years what we have in there for it to be a self-sustaining account, it really isn't a self-sustaining account. I would also say that the purpose of the revenues of a golf course, it's inappropriate to say that's exclusively to run a highly profitable golf course. It's not. It's to help run other aspects of that facility. And to the same extent, it's not fair to say that the revenues of a golf course should pay for everything else in a self-sustaining way. So to me, it's all coming back to the premise initially was not a right premise, and we haven't been able to execute it consistent with what the intent was. And I think we do have a very good solution in terms of moving it back into the moving it back into the operating budget, and also looking at how we report on it so that people can manage it the way that we want to.
It was one more email we got this weekend, and I just want to allay concerns of the golfers that we do have the additional fee per round. Again, unless you tell me otherwise, I see no reason why we can't continue to have that separate fund that does go solely for capital expenditures
We
for
can
the
break
golf
out
course.
the fund balance to designate it.
We've made, we can set up a smaller
Yeah.
fund. We've done the same thing with Culture Parks and Rec for field usage, right? The soccer clubs and everyone pay us for lines and grass cutting, et cetera, and we've been able to uphold our promise there. So we need to make sure that the golfers understand we're not sweeping their funds, we're not, now repurposing them after we made assurances to them that they was going to go for the capital needs. I think we can still live up to that promise, even if we do make this change.
Can someone articulate for me, what's the primary problem we're solving when we make this accounting change?
To me, it's the ongoing confusion and debate of cost allocation, what's fair, what's not fair, is it capital, is it not? In my 8 years, we've had the same debate every single year. It's solvent? No, it's not. You don't have your capital. Well, if you do this, it is. And again, that's not transparent to me. It's not effective, and to what Chris says, basically, we're arguing that the original premise of the structure of the fund has outlived its useful life. It's not serving its intended purpose before. We've, right or wrong, unduly put pressure on a golf course to fund culture, parks, and rec activities that ought to be funded by the taxpayers, quite honestly. And setting up this fund, we've created an environment where, well, you're making money and you're not, and we've lost our way over the years of, we need to fund recreation in this town because it's important. We have this asset, whether we have a profitable golf course or not. We can make the decision of what we want to do with the golf course independent of how we deal with this from a budgeting standpoint. But we have a pool, we have camps, we have to provide these services, or we choose to provide these services, and it is why people live here. And I think that this removes the confusion and increases transparency because we move away from the debate about $50 and we get back into the service improvements and back into the delivery model that we should be into is what do you need from an effective camp structure? What do you need from a pool standpoint? Oh, by the way, we want to do a splash pad. Oh, we got to figure out one more. We're not having those substantive conversations because we're debating whether it's 28% of Tom or it's 29% of Tom. It's not an effective usage of this board's capital.
And this seems to be lost in all of this. Seems to be the constant debate between golfers and non-golfers. That's really the what occurs at whatever coffee shop that you go to at 9 a.m. on a Monday through Saturday, the debate. And then the reality is we have to face it if you're a golfer, which I am a golfer, as you must know. Golf rounds will continue, golf participation will continue to go down. The weather is going to continue to negatively impact. You can't control the weather. We're going to have down rounds. We're going to have these years where it's very likely that the operational cost of that golf course is going to continue to go up, and the revenues that are going to be brought in to operate are going to go down. It's just you have to work within that mentality. So it's not really about whether the golf course sustains itself, makes money or doesn't make money, because you could say long term it probably is not ever going to make the money it needs to sustain itself. So let's fix this. Let's fix the systemic accounting challenge that we have here and get the transparency that we need and put forth a proper operational budget relative to the golf course's operation and then holistically the other services that sort of orbit around that facility as well.
To be clear, the conversation we're having now, is this a recommendation we'd be making to the Board of Finance at the end of the day? Is this their call?
I mean, technically, everything that we recommend is their call. But, I mean, I know the chairman's been annoyed with us for years on not solving this issue. I don't know if he and the rest of the board's going to like this solution or not. But
Yeah.
I think we're fulfilling what's been a thorn in the Board of Finance's side is they've had to continue to fund transfers to keep this fund solvent. And from an accounting and from a rating standpoint, we're funding operating expenditures for the community out of a general fund transfer, which we can debate the accounting and the politics and everything else all I want, but from the rating agency, this is not an intelligent way to continue to manage an asset. At least that's what we've been told, right? We've gotten away with it, but are we going to continue to?
I would think this meets more Board of Finance values than it violates them, quite honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, plus, remember, our recommended budget sends to them a deficit for the fund. So if I was sitting on the other end of the table, I would send the budget book right back to us and say, you are not sending me a deficit. This solves the problem. No more deficits, no more transfers. I mean, again, we still need to look at recreation. But
I think it's
Maria?
wrong to create this illusion that recreation is a losing proposition. It's not. I mean, for me, from a philosophical standpoint, recreation is never a losing proposition. That's something we do for our residents. You know, we're proud to do it. You know, it's a great asset in our town. And it bothers me year after year that we all sit here moaning about how, you know, we've lost so much money and that, well, we're not losing money. This is a service we provide. Just like we have a library and like we have bike trails and we do all those other nice things and playgrounds, you know, we don't expect them to make money to function. This is the only program we do that to, and I think it creates a very negative perception of how we provide recreational services. I think it's,
Okay.
I don't like it.
So I'm hearing consensus.
I did. Just back to Sean's point, you're segueing into things I've wanted to bring up all night very well for me. No, that's okay. It's great. So just segueing into the deficit. So my recommendation would be that if you do want to recommend consolidating all of the park and rec budgets within the general fund, is we do have that deficit issue. So if you'll recall, based on our projected revenues and expenditures, there was a deficit in the park and rec fund by about $90,000. So if it moves to the general fund, I do think we need to address that. There could be two ways that we could address that. One would be to move forward with the service reduction option that was provided in the possible service reduction scenario memo. So that would be if we were to reduce a full-time recreation supervisor position to 2 part-time positions. And the direct salary cost, that would be about a $37,000 savings. A very conservative number on benefit saving would be about an additional $24,000. So in total, if we were to make that staffing change, we could close that deficit from, we'd have about $61,000 in savings versus the $90,000. So that makes that gap to close in the general fund a bit smaller. Or we could simply, and we'll put it up in the scenario options again at the end. If you do decide to recommend that it all goes into the general fund, you could simply just say, okay, the general fund is going to come up with that, $90,000. Versus say about $30,000 if you were to make the service reduction change.
Okay. So let's, I just wanted to open it up for questions. I think that's actually a nice segue. So there were a number of items that were flagged after our budget discussion last weekend. Staff appreciate the additional context and the memos on those. I wanted to see if there were any specific questions on any of those items before we pull up the spreadsheet.
Thank you for the additional information on the health districts. I appreciate that. I still don't like that they nailed us with a 12% increase.
I don't either, Sean.
But, and I get that, I get
We
that some
essentially
of
don't
it
have a
is
choice.
statutorial, but,
Yeah.
we're not gonna,
Yeah.
I'm okay with it, but, I get that they get to tell us what the number is, and we have to fund it. And, I knew that last week as well, but they're statutorily required, and then there's the same discussion we're having, service improvements. And in the future, I would hope that they would, while we all want to have service improvements, these aren't always the best years to do them, unfortunately, unless it's a defined need. Again, we're looking at the teacher's pension, we're having this discussion and otherwise, and we're not the only community facing that. So, again, I understand that we're getting bigger and there's a larger per capita charge, but statutorial and service increases are, to me, two different things. And in the future, it would be great if they could present the two to us. And, the 7.5% is statutorial and another 3% or 5% is aspirational, or a service increase. And again, talking about that ahead of time, because, again, a 12% budget, when you're not the one that has to deliver the tax bill, is easy to do. So, but I appreciate the additional information.
Yeah, and part of the context, even with that increase, they're still below the statewide median, which is.
I would argue we're using less services than the statewide median as well.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
We're not a major city.
I'm not defending the increase.
No,
Yeah.
I'm saying.
For the record.
I got my Irish on, so I got to make sure I
Got to wait a few more days, Sean.
I walk my comments back. But I do appreciate the information there.
Okay. So I think one thing that would be helpful to me would be to pull up the spreadsheet and understand where we are in relation to the Board of Finance guidance.
A lot.
Yes.
You sure you want to see that?
Don't ask questions if you don't want to know the answer.
Really.
So, based on the comments that you all just provided, I created this spreadsheet that has the general fund commingled with the Parks and Rec, so they're all in the general fund now. And then the medical is set at the 10.44.
I can't see this.
Yeah.
6.5.
So if we compare to, we have,
Yeah.
is that better? Yeah. So if we look at what's coming over for our expenditures, and then we have to reconcile to last year because the Simsbury Farms Fund was not in there, we come down to our increase of 4.38. Our guidance was 272, so we have to cut $339,000.
That's it?
Is that including the Amy, the additional, the 27,988 we talked about with option A with the
It
health?
includes the 10%.
It does include that.
Yeah, the 10.44 for medical.
All right, and it's including the special fund with or without the 90,000 cut we were just referring to of expenditures?
It does not include the cut in expenditures.
Okay.
But
so-
that, actually, you can't count towards the 4.38 because that would have been in a different fund. So if we do
Well-
reduce those expenditures, it gets included as part of this reconciliation and goes right back in.
Right.
So the increase
And I'm
is
going to
actually
suggest we
more.
talk about how we want to deal with that $90,000 deficit, but, okay, all right.
So we should, so that, sorry, Chris, that 898 does not include the $90,000 deficit?
No, well, It does. It wouldn't show up on your expenditure side. It would be
Right.
included as part of your mill rate increase
Okay.
because that's what's eating it. But I'm just saying, if you reduce the staff and wages based on that and the 90,000, you can't include that as part of your general fund 2.72 because that never would have been in this fund.
Right.
So you would have cut it from a different fund.
So from the Board of Finance standpoint, they could look at this as another 90,000 on top of that.
Right.
Yes.
Which is why it's important to talk about how we want to present that to the Board of Finance.
Right.
It's been a while since we went up. a
Because
million
all of
bucks.
this impacts our budget, but the net impact on the on the mill rate is not, again, we're back to a expenditure revenue mill rate versus kind of our expense budget conversation. Okay, one thing I just want to highlight is we have, I just want to throw this out there. We have the transfer this year of the expense for the IT position with the Board of Ed, which shifted over to us, approximately 111,000. And yet, we also have revenue that's been increased equal to that. So it's a 0.55% impact on our expense budget, but it's really kind of a net impact. So I'd like to propose, we may want to present to the Board of Ed that the Board of Finance, that, that expenditure, we shouldn't be looking at it, we should be given forgiveness basically for that increase because it nets out with the revenue.
Isn't that already netted out?
Yeah.
That
That's
is already
included.
netted out. I agree with you, Chris, but that's.
Yes.
that's
Well, how
already
can it be netted out on the expenses when it's just,
That 438 is.
we pulled it out?
Is already given
Yeah,
us
I
the
took it out.
forgiveness.
Okay, all right, yep.
So our numbers are going up by more than 438.
Yep.
But from an actual standpoint, when you're apples to apples, we're only going up by 438.
Yep.
Right. I mean, we're going to, no matter what, we're going to have to communicate to the taxpayers what that large percentage is, what's causing that, but. what-
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I mean, you get down to, all right, what's the mill rate? Well, this
Yeah,
is the mill rate.
exactly.
So, yes.
I'm not concerned about
Yeah,
that.
I mean, we've had it before, right? Was it 2 years ago when
Oh, yeah.
the Board of Finance put $2.5 million against us? I mean, our budget went up 25%.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
everybody still voted for it.
Yeah.
Why, I don't know, but they did.
So, no, there's two ways we could go with this. Part of me wants to have a discussion about some of the items that are service enhancements, to have a discussion, anything we want to add, we add, and then we talk about taking away. So that we're having that discussion sort of with complete information about what that difference is. So with that, is there,
Can I?
Yeah, Sean?
Can we have 5 minutes just so I can get my brain
Yeah.
wrapped around it? Do you
Yeah.
mind?
Yeah, do you want to-
This is not going to be a short conversation.
Yeah.
Can we just take a couple?
yeah, absolutely. Let's, I was actually gonna ask if it was time for a break. Why don't we come back at 5 minutes to 8 o'clock?
Go.
Does that work?
I appreciate that.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Call the meeting back to order. And my recommendation for moving forward would be to look at the list of flagged items, particularly the ones that were either service enhancements or other additions, so that we would be able to look holistically, assuming we wanted to put any of those in, if there was energy behind that, put those in, see what the difference is, and then we could have a conversation about what we would want to pull out to get closer to the Board of Finance guidance. Does that approach sound reasonable? Okay. So with that.
Maria's waving her finger.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was just trying to get your attention.
Yeah.
So, if I'm understanding that correctly, Eric, you would like for Amy and Melissa to input the 5 service improvements that I mentioned during Budget Workshop Day, as well as the 350th committee request, or were there other items? I'm sorry, just in terms of.
Yeah.
Can we review what they were first
Yeah.
before we?
Yeah.
start plopping everything in?
Sure. Okay, sure. So one of the five, and again, I had noted as, in my opinion, probably the most pressing need was the shared accountant position with the Board of Finance. I'm sorry, Board of Education. The second we had was the deputy chief position. Another service improvement I had flagged, just to bring to your attention, was reinstating 5 hours to the admin support position at the library. That I thought was pretty important and had a pretty low cost. A fourth item was $2,000 flagged for dog park maintenance and supplies. And the fifth item was to fund the EDC project for updating the marketing and branding materials. So those were the 5 service improvements that I thought had a lot of merit and value, but just, again, didn't propose because I was concerned about, the overall budgetary impact.
Yeah.
Did you include the 350th in there, or is
Right.
that not really a service
Not a
improvement?
service improvement, but an outside agency request. So we did have the outside agency request from the 350th committee, which was truly new. And then we did have a handful of outside agencies that had requested increased contributions, among them SCTV, the Chamber, Simsbury Main Street, and I feel like I'm Meals on Wheels, I believe.
So to me, I think we take the 350 out of the operating budget and put it in the capital. That's a one-time cash.
It is a one-time cash thing. It's also somewhat, and I'm not making any promises here, but the way it's been discussed so far, by getting private sponsorship and stuff, there's a chance that that's reimbursable also, depending on how the financing goes with the rest of it, but I don't know that.
Sure.
We won't know that until it develops a little more fully, but it is a one-time.
Appreciate that, and I'm in agreement with exactly what Sean is saying. Move it.
Because to me, when,
where?
when we bring our capital to the Board of Finance, they're going to say, why is this in your operating budget? And where does it fall in your priority list? So I would rather do that now. At least that's what I would say if I was over there. And
Maria? Yeah, I'm sorry, Sean. It's my opinion.
Sure. And I'm going to ask Amy to weigh in on this as well, but I believe under the new capital budgeting and CNR policy that the Board of Finance did adopt, I don't believe that the contribution to the 350th committee would constitute an expense under the CNR fund. So if you were to recommend that to them, I think there's a likelihood that they might not endorse that just because it isn't consistent with the new capital budgeting policy.
so a one-time cash item they would rather see in the operating budget? It's not operating.
Even if it's one time, probably operating. It's like a special community event.
Told you I didn't like that policy.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Yep.
So for the
Unless
sake,
you want to make it a capital and/or non-recurring.
So we could give them the option of putting it there?
We're going to have a celebration every year. Next year, 351. Keep budgeting, right? So can we make those changes or not?
so should we put that in here?
The 5 service improvements and the 350th committee contribution?
Is that what you're
Yes.
suggesting, Chris? Yeah.
Nope, we can definitely.
Well, not the dog park.
The 350 is already in there, right?
No.
No, it's not.
It's not?
No, it was one of the 5.
No,
one of
that
those
was out.
items.
Just so you can give us.
All right.
Yeah, about that.
Again, just for the purposes, just to get a sense of the total.
Right.
What's the total objective we're thinking about getting to here?
When do they need that money, Sherry?
Now. But,
So why are we putting it in the operating budget for next year?
I mean, if we had,
oh, you mean why not this year?
if the goal is to seed money, because they have some
Yeah.
upfront expenses, would another option be to do, let's say, 15,000 now with the idea that we could do more later? I'm not suggesting
yeah,
that, I just
no,
want to
I
have
know.
the conversation.
Right. I know the contracts for like the grand ball had to be signed this week, so
They need the cash.
they're all very, and the, the contractors for like the country fair, things like, that's where that's going, just to put down the deposits.
Yeah.
So they signed a contract, but they don't have the deposit money?
Essentially, yeah.
Seems like a good idea. Who's on the hook for that? Who's on the hook for that?
That's an excellent question. It's not a town committee.
not a town
If the boss
committee.
didn't sign the contract, then
It's
it's
true.
not us.
Well, and quite intentionally, so
Yeah.
that's.
I mean, again, I'm not trying to have
No,
a
I know.
responsibility, but, people shouldn't be signing contracts without money to back up those obligations.
Well, I don't think they have. They've signed a.
Okay, so we got our new numbers.
Whatever that is.
Let's keep moving.
It's
Now, when we-
stuck in the minutia there.
When we looked at that list before, I felt we were lukewarm to the deputy chief recommendation. Are we just putting them all back in to look and see what the impact is and then discuss each one of them, or?
Right, sure. So this was for illustrative purposes. We just plugged in the 5 service improvements we talked about at Budget Workshop Day, including Deputy Chief. And then we also included the 350th Committee's request. So that gives you a total of what the budget would look like if we were to move forward with all of those initiatives. Since there were a lot of questions on Budget Workshop Day around the deputy chief position, the chief had put together, I think, a really excellent analysis for me as part of the service improvement process that I thought would be really helpful and illustrative to you. I know that the accountant position we had sort of talked about ad nauseum to some extent last budget cycle, and again this budget cycle, and again when we talked about the audit. So again, I didn't provide that level of detail in your flagged items follow-up, but again thought that the analysis that the chief put together would be very helpful for background information for you.
And it was, yeah.
And my perspective while looking at this, Chris, is asking is that we've got a professional in our town manager who is holistically looking, who's got under the hood, holistically looking at every single one of the departments and service value props of this town, and has identified what they believe, Marie believes to be the deficiencies, and essentially what could be perceived to be what it would take to fix those areas. And that's why I want to look at it in this way, because that's what we've asked you to do as a consulting professional, is to find the deficiencies and point out how we can fix them. We may not be able to do it this year, but
Yeah, I'm totally willing to do that. Keep in mind, it actually was not in the town manager's budget. Those were items that were identified as we were
100%, adding on
so-
top, 100%. But that's, to me, is to get it adding on top to get where she believes we should be at in these areas.
Yeah, thank you. That, again, those were items I felt that were important. Again, when we were looking at the health insurance increase at the time, even at 9%, and then also looking at the debt service increase, again, I was concerned of advancing those formally, but again, I think those are important priorities for us in the long term, along with adding parks maintainers in the long term. But again, I won't really have a good number on that until the Parks and Open Space Master Plan is done, so most likely having, some information for you next budget season about that particular issue.
So I know we're about to debate this number here, but again, we've got, 4 different issues? We've got the operating budget, which is well over the target increase with not a lot of good areas to cut. We've got to make a substantial recommendation to fix the health fund. We've got to look at cash not only, and capital not only in this year, but in the out years. And then, oh, by the way, the state's potentially sticking us with hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, again, while we're going to have these individual conversations, they all go together, right? Because it would be easy to say, all right, we'll just send the 5-6 over. Well, we're also we're sending a substantial mill rate increase when you roll up all 4 of those items.
Sure.
Right. So now the more difficult conversation is around, of those items that are in there, what do we take out? And I also think that as part of that conversation, we need to go back to the memo we received around service reduction, some of them being around building hours and other being around reducing or eliminating certain positions.
So 5.6 is all of those positions included?
Right. It was all of the service improvements, all 5 of the service improvements, 2 of which were new positions. 1 was a reinstatement of 5 hours to an existing position, and then 2 were non-staffing items, along with the 350th contribution.
So there's one other thing that I think would be helpful to bring up at this point, which is that we are, as you said, we are continuously facing pressure from the state, and we are almost inevitably going to be seeing less money from the state in future years. And I think one thing that we've talked about for a long time, well before my time on this board, is working more closely with other community partners, be that with other towns to share services, or even our own town and the Board of Education. And I think that there this could be a real opportunity to do something proactive, which would be perhaps a recommendation to the Board of Finance that we fund a shared services study. So this would be spending some money to save money, to look at areas between the Board of Ed and the town where we could partner. And there's multitudes of benefits beyond just the dollars there.
Agreed.
Didn't we do some of that before we did the healthcare
It was just
merger? Or am I forgetting
I
that?
think it was just the plan analysis around the health.
That was
fund.
just for the healthcare analysis?
I think we had to do that, yeah.
So my
It was got to pay the actuaries.
thought is that the scope of the study should be determined in a collective conversation with us, Board of Ed, Board of Finance, but I'm wondering if there would be support in sort of just a higher level recommendation to the Board of Finance at this point that this is something that we think would be of value at this time.
I do, Eric, because I think that we're going to continue to look at numbers of 5, 6, or 4, 8, or whatever, and in the future, and with guidance of 272, we've got to come up with creative ways
Yeah.
to meet that, because, again, folks can debate with us on our contractual, settlements, et cetera. We're settling them as prudently as we can and as responsibly as we can, but there are realities of doing business in this state with binding arbitration and rulings, and again, zero doesn't exist when you negotiate. So, our costs are going to continue to go up, and again, we either reduce services or we find a way to deliver those services more cheaply and effectively. So,
And that's what this would be.
I think you're absolutely right. I think we need to recommend that as a solution going forward. It doesn't do anything for us this year, except cost us more money. But I think those are wise dollars.
It's a story that I'd be happy to tell to our taxpayers.
Yeah.
Well, we don't know how much that would cost, though. Unless you have a number in.
I have nothing concrete enough that I would want to talk about out loud right now. But again, I know it's a tough year to be proposing that, but this is, again, it's something proactive that we can do that we know is going to be saving us money in future years and allowing us to deliver equal or perhaps even better services at a lower price.
Well, I like the idea of a commitment to a study, particularly going back to the IT positions that we've talked about. We have this cycle that we need to get ourselves out of saying that we either need to add resources to IT or we need to study shared services with the Board of Ed. And we've had that conversation ongoing, and I think we have an important point of stewardship to do one or the other. So the study, to me, was really the best approach to starting that process.
Agreed.
And I think the other department is obviously finance, which we've talked a lot about. And, I believe what we have in that department now, we are going to have to add staff, but I want to do it in the context of a shared services model, or at least looking at that. So when we're adding staff, we're doing it in that greater context. Sean?
I was just saying, so, yes, do you want to keep talking about that, or you want to go back to the operating?
Would it be helpful to have a formal motion on this? Yeah, Maria?
Sure, and what I could add that would be helpful is that I think if you all are very supportive of that initiative, again, under the new capital budgeting policy, a study such as that would fall under the CNR fund. So you could always take a look at the proposed capital projects in the capital plan or CNR plan. For example, one option might be perhaps we reduce the greenway maintenance from the capital fund, and then reallocate, say, $50,000 to the CNR fund to do a study. So if you wanted to advance a recommendation such as that, we could attach dollars to it if you were to make a reduction somewhere else in the capital or in the CNR fund.
I think we need to do that when we get to that.
Sure.
Well, I agree. I think it's really the responsible thing to do at this point, because, we all know what we're looking at here, and the Board of Ed has the same problem we do, just with bigger numbers.
So we'll take that up during the CNR discussion? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
Put it in the priority list?
Can I just ask one other question? So we're at 5.6.
Yep.
But we've got some revenue offset numbers that are in there, right? Because that 5.6 is including, the revenue of $124,000 for 50% of IT salaries, $99,000 for 50% officer salaries. We don't typically present our expenditure increases with revenue offsets, right?
Well, we're not, though, right?
Right. So what we did for the purposes of this chart, because again, for accounting and transparency purposes, we were showing those expenditures and then the offsetting revenues, so that net impact is zero to the budget. So what we did for the purposes of this chart is we showed the expenditure with the offsetting revenues, so it would have a net impact of zero on the overall percentage. So the overall percentage has that factored in.
But Amy, if you go to the levy worksheet, right, it shows the actual number. So our actual number, Chris, is going up 17%.
Yeah, that's part of what I'm highlighting.
Yeah.
I don't think the Board of Finance typically looks at this budget as a 5.6. Look at it as a 17% expenditure increase, and then independently they look at what the revenue impact is.
They can look at that all they want, but I think I'm comfortable making the argument that it's not a 17% increase in expenditures for the town.
I am too. I just think we need to be very explicit about that.
Agreed.
Right. And then that 17% would also include the transfer in of the expenditures from the special revenue fund.
Right. Because this is sliding into more of a, hey, it's the impact on the mill rate, not necessarily an impact on our operating increase.
Correct. But I mean, this is the closest we can get to sticking to their guidance.
I understand.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's just a different language we're using with how we present this to the Board of Finance than we've used in the past. We just need to be really cautious and clear about that, that's all.
Agreed. Yeah. I agree.
Okay.
So, to me, from an operating standpoint, if I was on the other side, I wouldn't allow any service improvements to come through unless they were from a catastrophic, we have to do it standpoint. We've had a number of service improvements in the past that we were able to make an argument for and stay within the guidance, et cetera, but, I'm not trying to kick the can down the road with the deputy chief or otherwise, but we can certainly highlight them as numbers, we've talked about, but in the past, we've been bold and gone to the Board of Finance with 5, 6 with those service improvements, and those have essentially been non-starters, and they send us back for the list of cuts, right? We can certainly do that tonight. But to Chris's point of, we've got enough of a message to manage that I would rather come to them with, look, this is on a year-over-year basis, we're funding the same expenditures that we've funded in the past. There's some transparency and there's some accounting differences, but on overall, our costs to deliver the services have gone up by X. There's no service improvements, there's no changes. This is the year-over-year change on a negotiated basis that, again, unless you want us to start reducing services, which I don't think I want to do, nor does anyone else want to do, that we start at it from that standpoint.
And we've done, our focus is a lot of best practice true-ups, which are dramatically impacting the expenditure increase, but to your point, Sean, it nets out, at a lower
But in the whole argument, though, I think we need to be very transparent with the Board of Finance. Again, I'm going to use that word 1,000 times tonight, because it's not only a deputy chief we need additional officers as well. We're building apartments like crazy, so this problem doesn't go away.
Right.
We need additional staff in this town, whether folks like it or not. So at some point, it goes from being a service improvement to a service requirement. So, again, I think we need to prime them for it, and hey, potentially we could add a deputy chief this year, and this would be the impact, or we can come to you in future years and give you a much larger number. But at some point, again, this goes from an improvement to a requirement.
Do you think that the position in finance is more justifiable based on our audit results and the technical problems that we have in maintaining, secure financing protocols? I mean, I think the Board of Finance could understand that.
Well, there's two arguments there. We got 350 years of it's worked, and then we have, we need to look at the future, and just because it's worked doesn't mean it can continue to work, and we
Well,
need
but I
to
think we
focus on it.
heard the evidence directly from Amy about what the exact problem is, and I'm wondering if it would be not prudent of us to ignore that.
Maria?
Sure. As I mentioned to you, just again, based on recommendations from the auditors, but also our observations. I mean, I think that, we all know that that department is understaffed, and I think that as we've been really trying to dig in and uncover things, we've seen, issues with capital projects management and tracking that we've, I think, now got a pretty good handle on, but with that, with our capital asset management, with bank reconciliations, there were issues, obviously, with the internal service fund, issues that, again, with more hands on deck, I think we would have probably been able to stay on top of better. And that is just an area of concern for me in terms of how well we're sort of able to, on an ongoing basis, stay on top of those issues with the current staffing model. Again, I give Amy a lot of credit, and I'm so grateful to her because she has been putting in so much extra time trying to help dig through a number of these situations, but that's also not sustainable in the long run.
Right.
To make sure that we're able to stay on top of these issues in a healthy way. So.
Well, and I think we're seeing here the result of not having enough people to oversee those issues, so
If we're
I'm a little concerned about that.
And for that position, again, that if the Board of Ed were able to, fund half of it, again, the intention there was to be a shared position, so we would be funding about half of the salary and benefits, and they would be funding half of the salary and benefits.
And is that the assumption that's in here right now?
Yes.
Okay.
But then it's netted out with a revenue standpoint, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are no easy decisions here. I guess I'm wondering from staff's perspective if there would be concerns about doing a study in 2019 to look at this department and the overall recommendation for what a shared services model could look like, or whether it would make sense to fund this right now because we have an acute need. And I'm really sympathetic to either one.
Sure. So, upstairs, they're really light, and the finance area as well. So I do think that there's a good chance the shared services analysis would show that it's not so much about, I think in terms of overall number of bodies, we could definitely use one that's shared between the two entities, where the shared services, I think, for financial management potentially might see improvements to quality, that if we're able to pool our resources, we might have more specialization spread across the same number of people, if you will. But I do think that we are light both upstairs and on the town side in terms of overall finance staff.
Okay.
Okay. So leave that one in.
Well, I mean, I'm certainly open to other discussions on that. I'm just trying to say where my concern is on that.
Yeah.
So is one option, leave that in, pull all the other ones out?
We can do that to show what that would look like.
Mm-hmm.
On the 350, I think we support that, but I think we support that in the current budget year. I think we talk to them about it. Because if they're signing contracts, I know I was being flippant before, but if they're signing contracts, they need that money next week, not
Oh, I know.
on July 2nd.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, I don't like it. I get that the policy says, but I don't like putting it in our operating budget because, as with anything, once it's there, it's hard to get rid of it in the future. People
I
lose
think
track.
that would be a good solution. I mean, I do think it's important to provide that support. I mean, this is an activity that has just generated a tremendous amount of energy and a really important project. So I think, that would be a great solution if we could head that way.
That would be great.
Yeah.
And I think we told them that on Tuesday, that, look, we're going to be coming to you, or we can pass the motion tonight to ask for that out of the current year.
One expenditure that I would advocate for is the one around economic development. This is a commission that we've said is among our highest priorities, and this is one of 4 work streams that we've given them. And I think that understanding this is again about growing our tax base in a responsible way. So again, spending money to I don't want to say save money, but we're talking about bringing the right kinds of businesses to town, and getting Simsbury's story out there. And that's what this money's looking to do. If we weren't comfortable with going with the full 18, I did speak with Sarah Nielsen. That money is broken up between about 12,000 for the design of the materials, and the rest is printing. And I got feedback that it would be very helpful for us to at least fund the design of the materials. And again, that's money that we wouldn't need to spend again for about another decade, based on the feedback I received.
Supportive of it because it's not a study. I think if we went to the Board of Finance with another study in the economic development frame, they
It's
would
not a study.
shut us down,
Not a
and rightfully
study.
so. But, yeah, I mean, that's something that we've committed to in the past. It's part of our marketing efforts from a real estate standpoint, from why this community is a phenomenal place to be. So I think we at least need to include it, and make the case for it, because I think you're right. I think, if we don't continue to attract residents and taxpayers to this community, then this conversation gets even more challenging.
Yep.
So you'd like us to include just the design portion of that request at about $12,000?
For now, I would advocate we put the whole thing in, and if we have to cut more, we can talk about that.
Okay.
So that number is taking out everything except for the shared economic, accounting position?
The accounting position and economic development, right?
So we're obviously heading towards recommending more than the 2.72. So can we start to chunk this? I mean, what percentage of this is basically our negotiated increases, for example?
Well, okay.
And
so
that
I don't-
was actually-
We didn't run the analysis exactly like that. We did have a couple of significant cost drivers. Again, we budgeted anticipated wage increases and contingency this year because we don't have settled contracts. I did use negotiated settlement trend in contingency, so we do have that budgeted there. In terms of negotiated step increases, we did have one big cost driver there, which were our patrol officers, and that was around $126,000. Most of the negotiated step increases in other departments, so it was pretty nominal, but that was the one where we had a really large increase.
But at the end of the day, our increases, what was it, three and change, Amy, without the two changes we just made?
It was 4.09, actually, yeah.
Okay. How can that be if we have 12,000 for the marketing and a position?
Well, no, that was before adding that back in.
And the updated health insurance number.
Yeah, I'm looking at the overage, the 411.
Oh.
Right. That's our current overage.
To answer your question,
Right.
though, if you back those two things out, that's the year-over-year no service improvements number.
Right.
So the only way to get to 272 is to cut current services.
Yeah.
Right?
So I think,
Yep.
I think, this isn't an easy thing to talk about, but I think we should go there in this conversation. And in the memo that was provided, I think there was one position in particular in Culture, Parks, and Rec where the one possible way to proceed would be to take a position that's a Parks and Rec supervisor. And what was, described by the town manager is breaking that into two part-time positions and making it a specialist position. And from what I understand from the feedback that I've received from staff, is there would not be too much of a negative impact to our services in terms of what our taxpayers would feel. So that's a step that I would recommend we discuss.
That goes against the 90 that's not up there, though, right?
Right, that goes against the mill rate only.
So that doesn't reduce our
Right.
473.
That's correct, right? It wouldn't reduce the 473, but it would have an overall
Yeah.
impact on that overall mill rate number.
Okay. That's 37,180.
Right, it would be the 37,188 is the salary savings.
And then the benefits.
And then, again, a conservative estimate on benefits, I believe, would be about 24,000, bringing that to around 61,000 in savings, which would close, again, that gap. The deficit projected was just over 90,000.
And that makes sense to me.
Okay. Are there any other, items from the service reduction scenarios that anyone wanted to bring up?
I mean, we're talking about eliminating hazardous waste collection, which, again, is a substantial benefit for this community and
Yeah, I
the
wouldn't be in
environment and
favor.
otherwise, that's,
I wouldn't be in favor of that.
no. I mean, but if we have to go back to cutting later, we need to remember that one, because that's not people. Right? Again, I don't want to cut it, but I would rather cut programs before people. I mean, the rest of it, the rest of the reductions are essentially eliminating all of the service improvements over the last 5 years.
Right.
That we've made. Which, it does, I can't advocate for any of those at this point. I don't think that makes sense. We advocated strongly for them.
Yeah.
I think, again, those are substantial service reductions, whether it be plow drivers or police officers or otherwise. That doesn't improve this community. That doesn't hold up to what people come here and want to be part of. So, you know, I'm not willing to entertain those, at least at this point.
Yeah.
I don't think we're in, I mean, again, these are serious numbers. These are tax levies. These are important, but I don't get the sense from the community that we're at that level where we should be panicking. I'm not panicking, and I'm not hearing that. If at the public hearing, we're hearing otherwise, and there's a substantial push, I'm willing to listen to it, but.
Yeah. Well, I think in fairness, and again, I'm not advocating this right now, but in reading the memo, there are positions that could be eliminated or reduced that, from reading the memo, it sounds like it would not have too much of an adverse impact outside of a relatively small community. And I would never, take lightly advocating that we reduce staff, but I think we owe it to our taxpayers to have the conversation.
Which one are you referring to?
Yeah, give me
Yeah,
Eric,
I'll
give
give
me
you-
an example.
I'll
just
give you
to
the
frame
example.
the forward thinking.
Just one was the reduction of a part-time administrative position in engineering to 17 hours a week, which would be a savings of a little over $20,000. And I'm not advocating that right now, but I did want to make sure that we saw it and flagged it, and decided not to move forward with that consciously.
The first memo, I know I'm backtracking a little here, but the overtime in the clerk's office, the $400, is that in there or not in there?
Sure. So I did include that in the manager's proposed budget.
Right.
The assistant town clerks are actually hourly employees, so in order to keep up with the workload, we would have to compensate them for those hours worked to keep up with the absentee ballot workload.
Right.
Whereas our town clerk is salaried, so we would not have to compensate her for those hours. So that simply reflects the hours associated with the assistant town clerks.
But we accounted for that already.
The $488,
Okay.
correct, right.
And the same with the registrar?
The registrars, that's correct. So that was their request. With them being elected officials, I did advance that request for them to you. But that is something, right, that you could, in theory, reduce if you weren't in agreement with the request.
I just wanted to make sure that those are already in there and not something we'd have to add.
The $5,000 for the library administrative assistant position is not in there currently. It sounds like from staff that is a relatively small amount of money that would have a outsized impact in comparison to other things. So I did want to have a conversation about whether there'd be support in putting that in.
I have no issue putting it in. The problem is that the memo talks about reducing service hours at the library. It talks about reducing service hours at town hall. And it would seem to me, are we going to restore the 5 hours, but then are we going to end up having to cut how often the library is open?
I wouldn't be in favor of that if that were the choice.
Neither would I.
Yeah.
I mean, I said it, we're getting into the nickels and dimes here. I'm not advocating service time for reduction in the library. I mean, it seems silly to close town hall on a Friday, to save $19,000, because I would argue that's just going to frustrate residents more and eliminate a day to do business. We've already cut back the time as it is, I hate to say this, but I mean, I think we go with that number and we explain it. And we talk about, if we're going to move off that, which we're not advocating, we're talking about library hours, we're talking about plow drivers, we're talking about police, we're talking about real things here, and we don't think that the community wants us to, nor do we think it's prudent, nor does our professional management think it's prudent to cut those services.
Right. Well, if we're going with the 4.73, to me, adding the $5,000 is kind of a moot point. It's almost a negligible impact, but does have a significant impact on the library director, so.
I agree, but as we've seen with the Board of Finance in the past, don't be surprised if the list is. Again, I'm fine with it.
That's what, no, I got it.
I mean, again, I support it, you're right, it makes, in the grand scheme of things, it's negligible in the mill rate. But I don't want to invite a cutting conversation because
Yep.
we've pushed things too far.
Yep. If we were reducing towards 2.72 meaningfully, then I would really try to stick with kind of
Yeah.
your decision-making of, let's avoid any service increase. But, I mean, you're talking about 5,000 added to a,
I agree.
4.73.
Does that get us to 4.75?
It's just
No,
Because if it does, I'm all for it.
Come on,
What does that
5,000?
look like?
A nice round number.
You need that number? I'll get to you here. This will be our comic relief for the evening.
And I hate.
There it is.
Look at that.
It's a nice round number.
So I'm clear, does that include any changes to the Parks and Rec position or not?
It does not.
It does not.
It would
Again,
just
that
affect
one-
I
the
wouldn't,
overall
right,
levy.
right, right,
Yeah.
right. Got it. It's 8:30 at night.
Is this the top? Oh, what's the, yeah, so,
I think we go and make the case. I think the assumptions from November have changed. I appreciate the 272, but I mean, we're in the mid-threes, if not fours, with a complete year-over-year with the healthcare challenges, et cetera.
yeah, I mean, the healthcare challenges, you can't not get, I hate to say the word, but you can't not get credit for that. It just is, it is there.
You can't
It
just
is there.
absorb that in
It's-
one,
No.
you know.
I mean, the only other thing, and I don't want to belabor the conversation, but I've mentioned this a couple times, I mean, we took, and I'm not suggesting it's a good idea, but we took some of the capital items out of the Public Works budget, right? I mean, is there an opportunity to pull anything else out of there and put it in capital? We clearly need to spend money on paving and salt and everything else, and I don't want to put that in jeopardy, but if we're trying to manage to a number, is that a more palatable way to do things?
Yeah, so the only two items that we could think of, we went back and did a review of our operating expenses with the new capital policy. Again, were those two that we suggested, which were the Public Works truck and
Yeah.
about 180,000 towards paving. Those were the only items we were able to really identify in operating that were truly capital.
So the
I
remainder
don't think there were
120
any
of the road
others.
improvements?
Right, so some of that road improvement money that we kept in operating, that's for things more like patching, like a pothole or, smaller scale work that wasn't, money that would typically be dedicated towards truly, resurfacing, a stretch of road.
And then the road and drainage supplies of 355, same deal? Yeah. I'm not looking to cut it, I'm just looking to move it.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason that, the 120, like Maria was saying, that was things like if you were to chip seal, which has an anticipated life of 7 to 8 years, it doesn't, or hasn't historically met the requirements for bonding.
No.
So if this was going to be cash for capital, it would allow you the flexibility possibly to make that move. The road and drainage supplies is all of the catch basins and the catch basin tops, and there is actually some patching money in that, just the way that we allocate the funds. But I guess it would be more of a financial decision as to whether or not that could go into a different fund.
Again, I don't like it because it makes it more susceptible if you're putting it in capital, especially with the pressures we're having in the out years.
Yeah, and I know that's one of the discussions we've always had, and I've always felt the pressure where I get asked, should paving be capital in the operating budget? And I've kind of always said the same thing, that there's a strong argument for both, and my only concern is that we keep a level of consistency, because even if we have 1 year where there's a downturn and we don't put the money in, first, we lose ground on our overall roadway maintenance, but second, the crews take time to ramp up and ramp down to these different activities.
Right.
It drives the Board of Finance batty to try to figure out the paving.
It's really not that hard. It's not that hard to figure out.
So, Amy, can you show us the mill rate impact of the 4.75?
Thank you.
That's all in with debt service?
And the teacher's retirement assessment, and the Board of Ed budget at 2.5%.
Yeah.
And that's including what assumption for adding to surplus? Is there?
Sure, so the, that's using a budgeted tax collection rate of 98.5%.
Okay. Yep.
And we want to change it to the 99.
Nope.
No.
Oh, yeah, for my view, absolutely. We'll
interesting.
switch it back.
That's what it does.
That's 99.5, right?
Correct,
Yeah.
yep, that's our anticipated.
Okay.
Wow.
So, Sean, I would support what you're proposing. I mean, I feel we always have to make a good faith effort to get back to the gap, but we have looked at recommendations, and as you said, they're extending us into legitimate cost savings to close that gap to really having an impact on services. There's a number of things that we're trying to accomplish when here that are just driving that number up. So I'm comfortable starting with that, and we'll deal with the feedback that we get from, the Board of Finance, so.
I agree, and I'm very willing to have a thoughtful conversation with them about all the analysis that we've done,
Right.
you've done, I mean, again. But, we're the policy board for how this town should be run based on the recommendations of the town manager, and I'm comfortable that this is the level of service and support that this community expects and demands. And if we hear and feel otherwise, then I'm very willing to go back and look at that.
Absolutely.
I'm going to push that for the eventuality that we don't really have we don't have many realistic levers off of that, the number we're going to push forward to them. So we can talk about starting there, but really, how far are we going to move off of it? It's just, that number is a
Without
very hard number.
significant service.
Yeah, which is.
The reality of the levers are, they're actually simple. They're awful, but they're simple. It's, you change the plow routes, and then everybody freaks out because the roads aren't plowed, and then they're screaming and yelling because we look like New Britain or we look like
Yeah.
Hartford. We can do that. But
No, I'm
We're
what I'm
playing
saying.
games with capital, which
Right.
has got us here in the first place.
That's where how we got here,
Yeah.
yeah.
Not suggesting we do that, but again, think about your drive in and out of town every day. Again, that will change.
I joke,
Real
but I
impact
don't
on-
joke. When you leave Simsbury.
Yeah.
When your roads are well maintained, when your police officers are responsive, when, your building permits are fulfilled in a timely, that's what we're talking about here.
Huge unknown.
That's a huge, the teacher's retirement fund contribution is a big unknown here.
It is. So we budgeted the governor's proposed number, so for revenues as well as the teacher's retirement system assessment. Excuse me. The net impact, after you take into account our increased ECS estimate, along with the teacher's retirement system assessment, it was a budgetary impact of about $244,000 should that proposal move forward.
And we counted that.
And we did count that in the levy
So that's
worksheet, so
a
we would have an
significant-
overall appreciation for that.
Yeah.
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 It's less than our budget.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I mean, that's something we
Yeah.
should be highlighting.
We will.
I mean, yeah, it could get worse too, but
Well, the debt service as well.
Yeah.
There are 4 substantial pressures this year. There's a
that's
governor's.
a big
There's a HARS. There's
pressure point there.
Agreed. All right.
Okay. Are there any other inputs that you need from us before drafting the motions?
We got to do capital.
Oh,
Yeah,
got
so,
to do
yep,
capital.
I would just suggest to see if there was anything left in capital or CNR. There weren't specific items in capital or CNR that were flagged during budget workshop day, but just again, if folks want to revisit anything that was proposed, we could work off of your sample budget motions, or if you simply wanted to go back to the tabs themselves. Again, just wanted to make sure that folks felt comfortable with year one, what was proposed for the capital plan, as well as year one, what was proposed for the CNR fund. If you were happy with it as is, we can, again, very easily, we've got those motions prepared. If you do want to make adjustments, say such as, again, I'll come back to say reducing greenway maintenance under capital to then fund a shared services study under CNR. That would be an example of something that we could make that change, and then update the numbers accordingly on the budget resolutions.
From our side, we're not recommending any bondable projects in this capital year, correct? From the town side, the bondable
Right.
projects are on the Board of Ed side.
Right, we worked really hard to try and identify revenue sources, even if it wasn't general fund, to pay for town projects in cash, again, to try to at least get a little bit of relief again in the out years. So if we were to follow this model, this would be, again, our second consecutive year of using cash for the town projects at least.
So I guess I would ask you and the rest of the staff, if this was the last time we did cash for capital, are these the top projects? These are the ones we have to do? Or would other things move up that would trump these?
There is one item in the CNR, if we had no CNR money whatsoever, there's a second piece to the ice rink mechanicals that I would be, concerned about if we had absolutely no cash, not even the 416 for CNR. But if we had the 416 for CNR, that particular item, I believe it's in year 2 of the CNR, that would be a priority. Because again, we have a couple of very expensive pieces of equipment out at the rink that are at the end of their useful life. And if we were to lose those and they go down, we potentially lose the entire season.
Yeah.
So I would say that one's pretty pressing from that perspective.
Where's the sidewalks?
Sidewalks would be under capital.
They're not in there.
Sidewalk reconstruction.
Reconstruction, yeah.
300,000 for cash.
There it is,
So are
okay.
you looking for capital to move out, or what's
I guess-
the question?
My point is if you go back to the debt chart we saw before, we're going over 7% just on our bonds. We can't assume that we're going to have $1 million or $1.5 million or $2 million of cash going forward. And again, the question is somewhat rhetorical, but assuming we get nothing for capital in the next year or 2 years, do our priorities stay the same? Because, I mean, we've got a $2.5 million radio that we're looking at, that obviously from a public safety standpoint is pretty substantial.
Right.
I mean, again, I'm not trying to pick winners and losers here, but if we do the high school roof, we might not get the radio system. We have to do the roof, we have to do the radio system. Now, this is the challenge we're in.
Yeah, so the projections that we did for the capital included the public safety radio system issuance, correct? So that was showing up in that target under debt service and out years if we were to fund that project. The items I would be more concerned about, again, would be those items we would be paying for in cash. So, again, a lot of the items you're seeing in the capital plan that would be proposed to be paid for in cash, such as the sidewalks or paving, or, again, the CNR, basically, that's all items in cash or other revenue sources, such as the private duty fund. So I really think it's a lot of the smaller dollar value capital needs that will suffer if we don't have cash for capital or very little cash for capital.
Agreed, but if we continue to bond at the rate we're bonding, again, that eliminates the cash as well.
Correct.
So it's a twofold problem, because we've always looked at debt service, right or wrong, as cash and debt service,
Yeah.
not just debt service.
Right.
And we've been trying to go the other way, and unfortunately, we keep going up.
Right.
Because again, we're talking, I mean, if you look out here, there's more roofs, there's more turf field construction, I mean, there's a lot of big-ticket items on here.
One thing that I think will hopefully help in years 2 and 3 of the capital plan, again, based on some of the development that's currently underway, I do think we will have some grand list growth in years 2 and 3. And again, part of that could be using that growth and new revenue to help with the cash for capital problem and helping to build that up over time.
I agree with you, except the fact that we're going to have to hire more police officers and other things. So service improvements are going to have to, I mean, again, they're not service improvements at that point, right? They're
Just keeping up.
Right. I mean, thankfully, there's not necessarily a lot of plowable roads coming necessarily, because these are more dense developments or private. Again, I'm making an assumption there, but I mean, again, the type of development that's coming in is putting pressure on services, right? From a responsiveness standpoint, from a permit standpoint, I mean, it's using town services.
What's really interesting about a lot of the development that we're seeing is that and what we're hearing from a lot of the property managers is that it's actually very attractive housing to a lot of millennials without children and empty nesters without children. So what's interesting about the development is that it is putting a pressure on municipal services, but we're not seeing massive enrollment increases on the school side with that particular style of housing.
You're not,
We
but
actually, do we actually take rolling mini census of those developments as they come online? Because, for example, you make that statement, so I'm down it, but initially, the property at the end of Route 10 on the Avon line, I forget the name.
Lincoln
Yeah.
and Blue Ridge, yeah.
I forget the name of it, but, you know, it didn't have a great deal, it didn't have a great number of bus activity within the first year. Now you go by, and it's a significant visual difference as far as the number of kids getting on the bus in the morning. So just from a perspective of, we make these statements, but then as the project matures, are we truly capturing the changes in the?
Yeah, the
Board of Ed's our
Board of Ed
guys.
uses third parties
Yeah.
for estimating, and what they do is they provide numbers relative to new developments as well as developments that were built and how many children are actually coming into the school versus what was originally estimated. And their estimating trends are pretty accurate.
Yes.
And you are right, Chris. There are some developments
There
that
is
the
some
expectation is there wouldn't be a lot of children, and there are, surprisingly.
Yeah.
And others that there was a higher expectation and there's less, so.
It was when we heard, was specifically that project, I remember early on, we were somewhat surprised at the lower, but I think the lower estimate, or the lower number of enrollees, I think it has changed, so.
Agreed.
And one of the trends you see is, you know, people who will move into town and rent a condo or an apartment and then move into a house in Simsbury.
Transition, yeah,
Right.
transition.
Yep, so.
Agreed.
But the Board of Ed does break those out actually by development, so you can see those numbers, how many kids from each development.
So from the capital, I'm comfortable with the capital as prioritized.
Yep.
Likewise.
I think it makes sense. I like that it's broken out. I think it'll be very easy to explain to the Board of Finance, look, we're being very transparent. There should be nothing to be confused about. This is what we want to buy. This is where we're choosing to fund it from. Again, that's up to them, but this is our recommendation, so. And I think it still gives us some flexibility in the future. I continue to worry about that, but I think we should talk to them in a separate conversation with, do we bond for everything that we said we're going to bond for? Do we use cash? Once we fix the internal service fund, is there, are there ways to get thoughtful on our debt on a longer-term basis so we give ourselves some flexibility? Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But from this operating and capital budget standpoint, I'm comfortable with what's here. You want motions, Mr. Woman?
If you're up for it, Sean.
I'm up for it.
All right.
Oh, could we take a break just to
Yeah, of
update
course.
the general fund number?
No, it doesn't
We'll
to
just
be
need a brief break.
We need to break it to do the motions, don't we?
Yes, we just need to
So
update your
she-
budget
yeah.
resolutions to reflect
Yeah,
the changes
understood.
that you made.
We
and
can
then
do a break.
Okay.
Some brief
Yeah. Okay, sounds good.
And just one, we should talk about amending the agenda to send that 35,000 for the 350 committee to the Board of Ed, or Board of Finance now.
Yes.
Yeah,
think
we
we should
can't amend our
do-
agenda after 9 o'clock, right? Isn't that a rule?
Oh,
rule?
I think 2 hours into the
We have a rule.
meeting.
Oh, it's part of your rules of procedure. I'm sorry, I thought you meant there was a FOIA rule. I thought, no, there's not a FOIA rule.
I thought that was a rule.
I think you're right. Well, we'll tell them it's
Suspend
coming.
your rules of procedure.
So you need a motion to amend the agenda
We-
to consider the 350 allocation?
I don't,
You could.
Okay,
If you want to take a formal motion on it, you could.
just in case anybody calls us out on it.
sure.
All right, I move that we amend our agenda to include a one-time fund request for the 350th committee.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Should we also talk about a formal motion for the shared services review?
I think we should take this money.
I'm fine with that.
Yes, but then we're going to have to put it in the capital. Or are we asking for that off budget?
My initial thought was asking for that off budget,
Mhm.
because I
Sure.
think that is something that's,
You're going to be out of town on Tuesday, aren't you?
I am.
Yeah,
Idea for that money.
that was rhetorical, I heard that. So they're going to yell at me, not you.
Okay. Yeah, we'll talk about that next year.
Yeah.
Would there be a motion to recommend to the Board of Finance that we fund a shared services study with a scope to be determined collectively between Board of Finance, Board of Ed, and Board of Selectmen at a future date?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Okay, should we take a break?
That'd be
So
great.
we can
Thank
get
you.
the numbers? Okay,
That'd be great. Thank you.
super. Let's call the meeting back to order. I I'm going to turn things over to Mr. Askham for some motions.
All right, so these motions are obviously prepared by staff, so I'm not just making these up, guys. So don't worry.
Understood.
So these are the 2019-20 budget resolutions. So I move effective March 11th, 2019, to approve the Board of Selectmen 2019-2020 operating budget in the amount of $23,788,622, to include the following changes from the town manager's proposed budget. We have a $3,309,000, I can never say these right, 3309079
Yep.
increase from expenses previously accounted for in the Simsbury Farms Special Revenue Fund. We have $27,988 increase on the health insurance premium rate to 10.44%, a $2,038 increase in the health insurance premium rate to 10.44% for employees formerly covered by the Simsbury Farms Special Revenue Fund, $53,743, which is an increase for the shared accountant position, $18,000 increase for the economic development branding and design materials, and $5,650, which is an increase for the library administrative assistant position.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Those motions carry.
I move effective March 11th, 2019, to approve the Water Pollution Control 2019-2020 operating budget in the amount of $4019347, including the Avon and Granby Clean Water Fund share.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries.
I move effective March 11th, 2019, to approve the Residential Property 2019-2020 operating budget in the amount of $37,372.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
I move effective March 11th, 2019, to approve the Debt Service 2019-2020 operating budget in the amount of $5,227,284.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I move effective March 11th, 2019, to approve the Capital and Non-Reoccurring Fund 2019-2020 operating budget in the amount of $1,138,860, including $416,250 to be funded by the general fund via the 5-year payback method, $450,090, I need some food, to be funded by the general fund, $100,000, this is an easy one, $100,000 to be funded by the Town Aid Road Fund, $100,000 to be funded by the Sewer Use Fund, $51,520 to be funded by the Police Private Duty Fund, and $21,000 to be funded by the Eno Trust Fund.
I'll second it. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I move effective March 11th, 2019, to add the following new projects to the capital improvement plan for the 2019-2020 budget in accordance with the Charter Section 803B. That includes the accounting system for $350,000, the transfer of the capital reserve, $50,000, replacement of the plant programmable logic controllers, $250,000, the underground tank replacement at TV and SHS for $325,000, and the district security improvements of $750,000.
Second. Oh, sorry.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Then I move effective March 11, 2019, to approve the capital improvement program to include the following projects in 2019-2020 with the total funding of $5,974,910 for the 2019-2020. The recommended funding is as follows: the accounting system, $350,000 cash; transfer to capital reserve, $50,000 cash; greenway improvements, $164,910 cash; the highway pavement management, a combination of cash and grants of $1,185,000; the sidewalk reconstruction for $300,000 cash; replace the plant programmable logic controllers, $250,000 out of the sewer use fund; underground tank replacement at TV and SHS, $325,000 bonds; the district security improvements, $750,000 bonds; and the SHS partial roof replacement of $2.6 million bonds and grants.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
And I move effective March 11, 2019, to refer the following capital projects to the Planning Commission in accordance with Connecticut General Statutes, Section 8-24, the accounting system, the transfer to capital reserve, the greenway improvements, the highway pavement management, sidewalk reconstruction, replace plant programmable logic controllers, underground tank replacement at TV and SHS, district security improvements, SHS partial roof replacement at the aforementioned numbers.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
We did amend the agenda before, so I move that we recommend the $35,000 for the 350th celebration to be funded out of the current budget year to the Board of Finance for consideration.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. And just to make sure I close the loop, we also recommended the shared services study.
Yep.
Right.
Good. So we have a little bit more meeting left before we go anywhere. Appointments and resignations. Is there a motion effective March 11th, 2019, to appoint the following individuals to the Sustainability Team? Caroline Meckel of the Economic Development Commission and Mary Turner of the Recycling Committee.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And I will recuse myself from item B.
Yes, propose appointment of Rachel Wellman to Culture, Parks, and Recreation Commission. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All who in favor, say aye.
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 Any against? So carried.
Oh, wait, should we discuss that?
Too late.
Oh, shoot.
This is why we saved that motion for 9:30 at night. Is
It's
there,
hard to explain if you went home with a no, huh?
is there a motion effective, is there a motion to accept the resignation of Regina Pinn as a regular member of the Clean Energy Task Force retroactive to January 11th, 2019?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Is there a motion effective March 11th, 2019, to appoint Sherry Kalman as a regular member of the Clean Energy Task Force with a term expiring December 2, 2019?
Moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Any proposed changes to the minutes of February 25th? Okay. Any Selectmen liaison and subcommittee reports?
Since it's been a few hours since we did it, just to remind everybody about the Community for Care program on Wednesday evening at 6:30. Our regular meeting starts at 5:45, and the program will start at 6:30 at the library program room 1.
Super.
Just one quickly, obviously, we got some pretty substantial Board of Finance meetings coming up. Obviously, as Maria mentioned, the Board of Education budget is being presented tomorrow night, and then our budget goes on the 19th. So I meant what I said before, and I'm confident everybody agrees. If there are challenges that the taxpayers disagree with, want to hear more, those are really important and appropriate times to come out. There will be additional public hearings. But, telling us in June that you didn't like the budget or disagreed with the priorities is not the time to do so. I mean, again, we're willing to hear it at any time, but if you want to make a difference, if there's something you disagree with, please reach out to us now. We've gotten a number of emails, number of questions. You folks all sitting here have done a phenomenal job as always. Really thoughtful requests, really, I know it was a long discussion, but an easy one for us because we're getting down to what makes sense, what are the priorities versus trying to uncover things or get into, a waste of nickels and dimes. So really appreciate all the effort from town staff and obviously Maria and Amy and Melissa. Obviously a lot of long hours, so thank you for all that you guys did on this.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Anything under communications that anyone wanted to raise?
We got bears.
Yeah,
They're about to wake up.
I know.
The Bears are coming.
The Bears are coming back.
All right, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Thanks, guys.